Okay, welcome to Eleusius. Okay, welcome to Eleusius. Actually, welcome to my spare room. Okay, so yeah, tonight's talk is about psychedelic substances. And back here in Eleusis, a couple of thousand years ago, lots of psychedelic substances were being taken, and so we're really going through something of a psychedelic renaissance currently in the Western world. You know, there's real talk among some leading public intellectuals of reviving the mysteries of Eleusis for the 21st century, including people like, you know, conservative favorite, even Jordan Peterson was saying that this project of, you know, this psychedelic renaissance was something of staggering importance. I mean, I couldn't believe my ears when I heard a kind of Sam Harris talk from a couple of years ago that he took, you know, 5 grams of magic mushrooms, and he's calling for the reinstating of the Institute of Eleusis for the 21st century. Unbelievable. I thought I was tripping. I thought someone spiked my drink or something. But yes, it's true. One of the world's leading atheists is advocating the reestablishment of an ancient rite whose central aim was the you know, union with God. Okay, so yeah, life is full of irony. But anyway, yeah, so this amazing psychedelic renaissance going on. Universities like John Hopkins and here in London, Imperial College, now studying psychedelics in a kind of therapeutic setting. You know, kind of like interest and usage is kind of exploding. Really, people are getting really interested in this thing. So we're going to really just explore, I think, one of the really interesting aspects of psychedelics, okay, which I think is for me is the most interesting, okay. I mean, there is the kind of therapeutic aspect, the kind of, you know, 10 years of psychoanalysis in a couple of hours, okay. There is the kind of, yeah, there's the kind of entertainment value, as the bright colors, the cartoon world, the hilarious laughter, the kind of, you know, the kind of like real kind of like enhanced kind of everything, really enhanced enjoyment of life. And there's the enhanced orgasms, everything, you know, but that's not the main thing. I think the main kind of thing going on with psychedelics is this entheogenic aspect. And that's what we're really going to concentrate on tonight. We're really going to ask the question, I hope to give a very compelling answer as to why it is that psychedelic drugs produce this state of being one with God or one with the universe. And I think that's the central, you know, deal with psychedelics, and it's the central thing about Eleusis, and that's what it was all about. Okay, so this talk is really a continuation of the last talk in last November, which was really about the resurrecting of the ancient mysteries for the 21st century, the kind of central core ideas of religion through science. Okay, so if you missed that talk, search it on YouTube on my channel. It's called The Full Resurrection of the Core Mysteries of Religion for the 21st Century Through Science. So it's a kind of, this talk is a kind of continuation of that talk, and we're going to just show the kind of like, I guess, the experiential personal aspect. If that's more cosmological, that was more kind of metaphysical, this is going to be more kind of yeah, this is going to be more kind of like experiential. And then how do these mystic states of being one with God happen? How did it happen? Okay, so okay, David, to everyone, are you saying Eleusis? No, I'm saying Eleusis. Yeah, Eleusis, as in ancient Greece. Okay, it's Eleusinian mysteries. So we're going to go basically first. We're going to show how psychedelic substances. It's not just ancient Greece, it's absolutely universal in world religion, basically. So this is something which is not just about, you know, I recently read a book called Immortality Key about, made the New York Times bestsellers list. And this guy wrote a book, and it's all about the idea, which has been going around for years, that the Christian mysteries were really based on psychedelic rites, like the rites of Eleusis, Dionysus, Bacchus, etc., Mithrais, etc. And we think that's absolutely right. And but we're going to show in the first section of the talk now that really this idea is universal to all world religion. Okay, so basically all world religion really has at its, you know, really at its beginnings and all throughout its development, psychedelic drugs. Okay, so this is this is what we'll do first. Okay, this diagram here, we're basically going to start from Judaism. We're just going to go clockwise. Okay, so all these religions, which is, it's not completely representing all the world's religions, but we've got a fair sample of the major religions and most of the people on this planet and most of the traditions on this planet. Okay, so Judaism has a really rich history of psychedelic use in the background. Okay. So Old Testament, okay, we start with the kind of book of Genesis. Okay, now, this comes up a lot in kind of people talking about psychedelic drugs in the Bible. Adam and Eve, okay, the tree at the center of the garden, the fruit, you eat of the fruit, your eyes will become opened, you have knowledge of good and evil, you will become like gods. And you have this knowledge, and somehow it says, look, many people believe that this is a psychedelic reference. Maybe not. I mean, if you've taken psychedelic drugs to have this kind of eyes opening, becoming like God, then it seems fairly obvious. But I mean, it seems it's plausible. Now, if we move on in the Bible, what's really interesting is this manna thing. Okay, the manna that fell from the sky. Okay, this is in the book of Exodus and Numbers. Okay, it's actually described, the manna, the grain from heaven, as it's described in the Psalms. Okay, this manna substance that the Israelites ate in their 40 years in the desert. Okay, they would eat this substance, look east, and feel the glory of Yahweh. I know what that sounds like to me. And there's actually very explicit descriptions of what this manna looked like. Okay, in Exodus. Okay, I can tell you, it's actually chapter 16, verse 31. Okay, the manna was white like coriander seed. Okay, it tasted of wafers made of honey. Okay, wafers made of honey. That sounds like, well, it sounds like a kind of psychedelic preparation, doesn't it? Years ago, I bumped into a friend. He showed me a kind of cannabis. He said this was pollen. Okay, something like 20 years ago, I saw this guy show me some pollen. Okay, so I looked up on YouTube, and I looked up what does coriander seed look like. I don't really know. I mean, I looked it up, and it looks exactly like pollen. Okay, there's kind of hashish. Now, in the book of Numbers, okay, in chapter 11:7, okay, chapter 11, verse 7. More description, the manna, okay, is like coriander seed, and it looked like resin. Okay, it looked like resin. And I'm saying this because I'm not making it up. This is actually in the Bible. That's why I'm saying the actual verse in chapter Numbers. Okay, so manna sounds like it's creating this kind of state of being like feeling the presence of Yahweh, and actually looks like modern psychedelic preparations. So, again, it's like, what is this mysterious manna? Are we to go with the kind of the movie version, literally bread falling out the sky and all that kind of business? Or are we to make a kind of maybe more kind of a sensible guess that it might actually be a psychedelic substance? Okay. Now, continuing with the Old Testament, we have the story of Jacob and his wives. Okay, his two wives, which Leah and Rachel. Now you think your love life is complex. I mean, this is really complex. I mean, this is Genesis chapter 30. Okay, so look it up. It's all about mandrake. Okay, mandrake is essentially psychedelic. It is a witch's weed. It's basically it's a cocktail of atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine. Okay, so it's a psychedelic, drug. And story is complex. Basically, Leah is the unloved, and her son Reuben finds mandrake in a field. Rachel is barren and wants to have kids, and mandrake is, apart from being psychedelic, is aphrodisiac, but it's also fertility treatment. So, cut long story short, Rachel wants the mandrakes, but to get the mandrakes, Leah says, "You must swap a night with our husband, because he doesn't actually sleep with me anymore." That's why she's called Leah the Unloved, for my son's mandrakes. Rachel gets the mandrakes to cure her infertility. Leah presumably uses the mandrakes as an aphrodisiac, gets to sleep with Jacob, has more kids with him. Okay, cut long story short, basically, mandrake was something that was used, in these times for as a fertility treatment and aphrodisiac. We know that from history books, from archaeological studies. Now, okay, there's this thing called Jacob's ladder, where Jacob ascends to the seventh heaven. It doesn't say in the Bible he took a whole bunch of mandrake and he basically had a mystical experience. But we can kind of guess there's a kind of very rational reason why Jacob would have these mystical experiences. It could have been mandrake, it could have been a whole bunch of other things. It could have been manna, it could have been some kind of cannabinoid. But again, we think that this is a kind of like a association with a psychedelic in the patriarch of the tribe of the Israelites. Okay, now moving on to Moses. Okay, our final case study in Judaism. So we're going to concentrate quite a lot on Judaism because it's an important religion. Now Moses, basically, no matter how you slice it or dice it, he was an Egyptian prince. Okay, he was born an Israelite, but he was an Egyptian prince. Now, rabbinical traditions in Judaism hold that he learned all the knowledge of ancient Egypt, all the kind of mystical knowledge, the philosophy, the mathematics, and also the mysteries, the religion of ancient Egypt. Now, ancient Egypt is really, the use of mandrake and the water lily, the blue lotus of the Nile. It's basically part of that culture. Tutankhamun's tomb, mandrake, water lily, lily petals all over his tomb, kind of blue lotus iconography. It was just part of that culture. So it is inconceivable that Moses, man of his caliber, would have been unaware of these Egyptian mysteries. Now, the story of the burning bush. I mean, one academic in Israel has recently proposed that the burning bush is acacia, which means it contains DMT. Maybe, maybe not. It could be some cannabinoid. But really, what's really unmistakable is that surrounding Moses's life, his upbringing, his journey through the Levant, he is surrounded by psychedelic substances, and these psychedelic substances will give him exactly those kind of mystical experiences described in his life story. Okay, so I think that is a pretty kind of like that's a pretty comprehensive view of Judaism, just to show that really, psychedelics are just part of that religion, just part of the whole tradition. Now, Christianity, we mentioned the recent book, Immortality Key. Now, this is a very old idea. Essentially, that the entire ancient world, you had the Dionysian mysteries, the mysteries of Mithrais, Bacchus, Eleusinian mysteries, and really all these mysteries use psychedelic substances of various kinds. And when we look at the Bible, there's actually a psychedelic reference, which is in Matthew and Luke, which is also in the Gospel of Thomas. And I'll paraphrase it variously. It's something like, woe to you Pharisees, woe to the lawmakers. You have taken the keys of knowledge, you have taken the keys to the kingdom, and you have hidden them. You yourselves do not enter, and you prevent those who wish to enter from entering. Now, that sounds like a kind of modern day situation of psychedelic drugs. I mean, the keys to the kingdom, the kingdom of God is not someplace in the cloud where the Catholic Church decides whether you go up or not. Okay, really, the key to the kingdom was something internal. It's just something that could be banned and suppressed. Now, the idea that the bread and the wine that Jesus served up was really a kind of an adoption of those ancient mysteries of Dionysus and Mithrais and the Eleusinian mysteries, which was essentially part of that part of the world, including Palestine, including that whole kind of landscape. And that Christianity is really a continuation, but in a way that basically takes out the actual drug, and the bread and the wine now is basically a placebo. Okay, that's the whole thing about the Immortality Key, this new book. And so the idea has really made the mainstream, which is great. Okay, so it's fantastic. So Christianity is essentially a kind of adapted drug cult. That's the basic idea. Okay, now we're going to move around this circle to go to the next religion, Islam. Okay, now it's kind of widely known that if in Islam if you found with alcohol, then you are beat, so you can get in trouble. But it's kind of generally known there's a kind of more of a tolerance for hashish. Okay, the reason why is because there's one hadith, a saying of Muhammad, or a saying relating his life, which is absolutely believed by all the sects of Islam, absolutely valid, and it goes like this. I'll kind of paraphrase the hadith. It goes like this. The apostle of Allah, i.e. Muhammad, said to us, "Come with me to the house of Aisha," one of his wives. Okay, we went with the Prophet to the house of Aisha. The apostle of Allah said to Aisha, "Bring us food." Aisha brought us hashisha and we ate. She brought us hashisha and we ate. Now, hashish, cannabinoids, when taken in large enough quantities, it's psychedelic. Okay, so the stuff you buy in the streets, even the strong stuff, I mean, it is, you can send you to mental hospital. 20 years ago, there's lots of studies about schizophrenia and cannabinoids. But very potent strains of hashish, from personal experience, like charis that only comes from India, it's really, really strong. And even when you smoke it, basically it's more like taking LSD. It is really, really powerful. Now, if you eat resin, if you eat hashish, the effect is many, many times stronger. So the hadith where Muhammad is, kind of said with his friends that eat hashisha suggests the taking of a psychedelic substance in those kind of quantities. And all through Islam, the kind of famous assassin sect, the Ismaili, who are the Sikh Shiites, who are a very Gnostic, mystical sect, they're called assassins because it's a kind of Anglicanization of the word hashashin, which means those who eat hashish. So we can go on. Sufism, the association between Sufism and hashish is long and has continued even to the present day. So there's this kind of relationship between Islam and cannabinoids, and in order to produce these mystical states. And it is not implausible that, if Muhammad ate hashisha, he would exactly have experienced these kind of mystical experiences, like ascending the seventh heaven, like Jacob with potentially his mandrakes. So Islam is really, there's something about Islam which is basically psychedelic. Now Buddhism, and now people saying, where's the psychedelics in Buddhism? The official story of Buddha, his his final enlightenment. He was, he did everything. He went all the way through India, meditated, learned all these techniques. He wasn't quite getting his enlightenment. He kept meditating. He was fasting. He was half dead with kind of fasting. Now the official story is basically before his enlightenment. This is not controversial. This is the official story that's been handed down for the past 2,500 years. Just before his enlightenment, a young girl gave him a white milky substance to drink. Now there's a white milky substance in India called bang, and it contains a small quantity of cannabinoid or of THC. So it's not implausible that small trickle of cannabinoid would have basically, bang, triggered Buddha's final enlightenment. I'm not saying you drink a bit of cannabinoid in a bit of milky substance, a bit of milk, and you're going to become enlightened Buddha and found a new world religion, but it's plausible that is a factor. But also in Buddhism, there's what's called Vajrayana, which is actually the Dalai Lama's school. It's called the diamond vehicle. So the Mahayana is the kind of foundations of the house. The Hinayana is the kind of walls of the house. But it's Vajrayana, the diamond vehicle, is the roof of the house. Now Vajrayana was brought to Tibet from India by a guy called Padmasambhava, which means lotus born. Lotus. Now lotus, blue lotus of the Nile, we talked about in Egypt already, blue lotus of the Nile, white lotus in China, in the Far East. Basically, lotus is psychedelic. So the idea that Padmasambhava was lotus born. Now the legend is that he appeared as a baby on a giant lotus leaf and he kind of descended, and that's why it's called lotus born. There's actually a rather straightforward explanation of why it's called Padmasambhava. It's because Vajrayana Buddhism is essentially tantric Buddhism from India transported into Tibet. And the tantras in India do use psychedelic substances. And, not much grows in Tibet. So probably, the kind of psychedelic use kind of diminished until all the, Tibetan priests came to the West after the communist invasion, and they really got into LSD and all kinds of things. But the thing is, the idea that the Vajrayana Buddhism, Padmasambhava, he was essentially a tantric adept who was basically, his journey started with psychedelic substances, like many of the tantric practitioners in India. So, moving on the diagram. So we're going to kind of move on to Hinduism. So this is quite straightforward. I mean, Bhagavad Gita talks about the Soma drinkers. Soma drinkers, people drink the Soma and they experience the delights of the highest heaven of Indra, and then they come back to earth. So soma means to press out and extract. And there are actually ancient Hindu Sanskrit texts which describe the lotus as soma. So at some point in the history of India, people were pressing out and extracting the lotus plant, and presumably they were drinking, eating it. Okay. So soma drinkers, kind of like is really an undeniable reference to psychedelic plants that may have been lotus. It could have been a whole bunch of things, but it's psychedelic. Okay. Now the tantras we talked about already. We talked about charis. We talked about that charis is this really strong cannabinoid. And the story is that these sadhus in India smoke charis all the time to get mystic states. And the kind of legend is that Shiva smoked charis for 1,000 years to become the high god. So it's real kind of link with kind of Eastern mysticism and these mystic states. And also Datura is used quite a lot historically in India. And the idea that Datura grew out of the chest of Shiva against these kind of very, very kind of mystical connotations with God. Okay, my internet connection is unstable. Okay, I hope everyone can still hear me. Okay, I'm gonna stop share for a minute, and I just hope my internet connection is okay. Okay, looking better. Okay, I'll just go off the diagram and to make things so I can see that everything is fine. Okay, so I think everything's okay. So we did Hinduism, and the last section of the diagram was Taoism. That's really straightforward. Okay, that's really straightforward because in academic literature, there's no debate. I mean, there's agreement that Taoism, from which Zen Buddhism is derived from something called Chuan, which is derived from the synthesis of Buddhism and Taoism. Taoism is, generally agreed to derive from Siberian shamanism. Siberian shamanism, it means fly agaric mushroom. Generally, that's what it means. Probably other stuff as well, but that's the main sacrament. Now, actually, the word shaman comes from that part of the world. The word shaman is actually Manchurian or Jurchen, so it actually comes from southern Siberia. So anyway, in our little kind of survey of world religion, can you see that that we basically, in terms of world religion, it's not just a kind of like it is pretty universal. It is this psychedelic thing. We could have gone into Zoroastrian. We will in a minute. Zoroastrian prophecies. We can go into other religions, but that's a kind of fairly good overview. Now, the last talk we actually see this diagram here. In the last talk, we kind of presented this unification of where I'm wiggling my arrow. The last diagram is essentially mysticism and religious experience in world religion. So we kind of cover that. So that's really psychedelics all over the place. In the last talk, we really synthesized world religion with the notion of mythology, this notion of a monomyth. So mythology, and also synthesize that with the story of prophecies. So prophecies and mythology, monomyth is really the same kind of class of story. And we also synthesize that with what's known as magic. We went through in the last talk the notion of the Renaissance magus and what witchcraft, wizards, warlocks, what it's really about. Now, to extend the picture, we'll also just show that psychedelics and explain that is also in these areas too. So in mythology, okay, we spoke about the lotus plant. Now, the myth of myths, the classic of classics, the Iliad and Odysseus. The first island, the first port of call is the island of the lotus eaters. Okay, so again, a reference to psychedelics, the blue lotus of the Nile. It could have been the same thing. In the oldest story known to man, Gilgamesh, there's the talk of the search for the plant of immortality at the bottom of the ocean. And we know that in Mesopotamia, they were using mandrake, they were using datura, they were using cannabinoids for the kind of mystical ceremonies. So it's a reference to some kind of psychedelic plant. We talked about the Soma drinkers, which is in the Bhagavad Gita, which is actually part of a bigger myth called the Mahabharata. Okay, so it's part of a mythic work in the same way that Odysseus is a story within the Iliad. Okay, so mythology, again, psychedelics in the most important myths in the world, I'd say, the most important ones. Now, okay, this is a surprise to many people. Now, the prophecies in world religion, okay, in Zoroastrianism, but also in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, also contains unmistakable references to psychedelic drugs. Okay, so Zoroastrianism is okay, a very influential religion. It's really important, but there's not many Zoroastrians today. It massively influenced Judaism during the exile in Babylon. Okay, in the Zoroastrian prophecies, in the main holy book, the Zend-Avesta, there's prophecies for the Saoshyant, which is the world benefactor, world renovator, on which the Jewish Messiah was based. And the prophecy goes that the Saoshyants will cook the white hawoma, which is the Zoroastrian, psychedelic sacrament. That's what historians agree on. The prophecy says he will cook the white hawoma in the fat of an ox, and he'll give it to all humankind, and all humankind will know eternal life. Okay, again, this psychedelic reference, not in terms of the past, but in terms of the future. Now, okay, that the white hawoma, it could be like the white manna in the Bible. Okay, it was white. Okay, now the fact that it's cooked in the fat of an ox, that suggests fat soluble alkaloid psychedelic. Okay, so we don't know exactly what hawoma is, but it kind of narrows down the kind of possibilities. Okay, now what's really interesting is Christianity. Book of Revelation. There's a very kind of powerful reference to psychedelics, actually in three places, but the two we'll concentrate on is this: to him that overcometh, whoever overcomes himself overcomes the world. Okay, to him that overcometh, I will give to him dominion over all the nations. So it's kind of like a reference to the second coming of Christ, whether you think it's one person or many people. Okay, so it's a kind of the Christ or the Christs. Today, or him who overcometh, I will give to him a portion of the hidden manna. It returns, the hidden manna returns in the end times. Okay, I will also give to him to eat of the tree at the center of the paradise of God. So again, the tree at the center of Garden of Eden returns, and we eat from it again. Okay, so the hidden manna, a portion of the hidden manna, what does that mean? Okay, we discussed the manna with respect to the ancient Israelites. Okay, so the hidden manna returns for the future. These are future prophecies. To him that overcometh, I will give him a portion of the hidden manna. Why is it hidden? I'll tell you why it's hidden. It's because the manna was contained in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, we know that it's in the New Testament and the Old Testament. It's in the book of Hebrews. We know why it's in the Ark of the Covenant, because in Exodus, Moses says so, put a whole bunch of manna in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, now why is it hidden? It's hidden because, okay, when the Babylonians took Jerusalem in 586 BC, okay, this is not in the Bible, it's in the Apocrypha, which is the extended Bible. The prophet Jeremiah hides the Ark of the Covenant along with the manna, and so therefore the manna is hidden. Now the Ark of the Covenant has never been found. Finding the Ark of the Covenant would be one of the greatest historical finds of all time. I mean, even greater than the tomb of Tutankhamun, up there with the other pending historical great kind of pending find is the tomb of Genghis Khan. Okay, so it would be amazing if it was discovered, analyzed, and somehow they discovered, we could work out what the manna was. Now, the historian Dan Merker wrote a book. It's very good. I highly recommend it. It's called The Mystery of Manna. And in that book, he suggests that, with lots of kind of circumstantial evidence derived from the Bible and the New Testament in particular, he kind of suggests that the manna is ergot. Okay, his case is not totally convincing, but it is plausible. Okay, so in his book, Mystery of Manna, Dan Merker explains or tries to present the case that manna is ergot. Now, this would be, if it was, it'd be most amazing, because LSD, when it was first synthesized, it was synthesized from ergot. And it would be amazing if the Ark of Covenant was found and they analyzed it and had found traces of ergot in it. That would be amazing. Okay, far out stuff. The book Immortality Key, they actually analyzed a kind of like a burial site and actually Catalan. It was actually a Greek site, and actually found traces of ergot in a burial site from several hundred years BC. So that's interesting. If the same could be done for the Ark of the Covenant, absolutely amazing. So yeah, I mean prophecies, the idea that these ancient religious drugs will return in the future, I think it's borne out in modern times, because it's happened with psychedelic 60s and with the current Renaissance. I think that'd be quite interesting to see how that unfolds. Now, okay, we just just make sure we get time. Oh gosh, it's 1/2 already. Okay, just to conclude this analysis of this diagram. Now, we talked about magic last time. Okay, so magic, witches, warlocks, and wizards. Okay, there's an idea which has been around for decades, and it's actually is getting more and more support. It's the idea that the witch hunts weren't actually trying to find evil, wicked people casting evil spells. That what was actually behind the witch hunts, what's happening in reality, was that these groups were being sent out. These kind of witch smellers were actually what they were doing. They were actually rooting out ancient mystery religion, pagan mystery religion that had survived the kind of previous inquisitions, and that was being practiced in the countryside. So yes, I mean, cantankerous old women who were unpopular in a village would have been accused of witchcraft and casting wicked spells, and they would have been killed, and the villagers would have took all property. That kind of thing would have happened. But the major kind of reason why these witch hunts were happening was really rooting out ancient mystery pagan religion that had survived in the countryside. Now, these people were using witches' weeds, okay, i.e., henbane, okay, active ingredient scopolamine. They're using belladonna, active ingredient atropine. They were using mandrake, active ingredient cocktail of atropine, scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and they're using datura, again, the cocktail of those three again. Now, these witches' weeds, yes, they are giving these witches names, hell's bells, devil's trumpets, and all that kind of business, and they are poisonous. You take them in the wrong way, you're going to die. They're going to stop your heart beating, but they are all psychedelic. They will all give you these psychedelic experiences, these experiences of being one with God, or, one with the kind of witchy God, or the magus God, or whatever you want to call it. Okay. Now, interestingly, all these substances in all these witches' weeds, scopolamine, atropine, hyoscyamine, okay, in all these witches' weeds, henbane, belladonna, mandrake, it sounds like a Harry Potter convention, doesn't it? Mandrake, all that kind of business. Well, like this is all these chemicals. They all bind onto the same receptor subtype. It's called the acetylcholine muscarinic receptor subtype. It's named after Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom. Okay, so basically there's a brain receptor named after a psychedelic, the fly agaric. And we'll talk more about the fly agaric later. If the witches' weeds were what we described, then the fly agaric is sort of like the witches, familiar's toadstool. It's what the witches' kind of evil imp sits on. Okay, so anyway, again, fly agaric, kind of very widely used psychedelic in a kind of like in Northern Europe, all around Siberia, all kind of like in the kind of like Slavic nations and everything in the East, and it's very widely used. Okay. Okay, so the picture I hope you're getting is basically, okay, I'll stop sharing again. So basically I can, so I hope you get the picture that really psychedelic use is really universal. It's world religion. It is mysticism. It is mythology. It is prophecy. It is magic. It's basically really a kind of universal thing. So when you kind of lump in, kind of psychedelic use in world religion, mysticism, etc., with indigenous religion, i.e., the kind of religions of North America, South America, the kind of shamanism of Russia, Siberia, etc., and Africa, then we really have a kind of a unified view of world religion in the use of psychedelics. Now, that in itself is really, really powerful, isn't it? If we're looking for some kind of way of kind of bringing together the kind of world culture and the kind of this kind of some kind of universalism, then that is a very powerful kind of a base, isn't it? Now, we're going to take things much further. Okay, so this is okay. We kind of covered the history of religion, the kind of the history of mysticism, mythology, etc., and prophecies and magic. Now we're going to go into neuroscience. Okay, so we're going to completely shift a different gear, and we're going to basically give the foundations for this kind of grand unification of world religion in neuroscience. So, all world religion, indigenous religion, shamanistic religion, kind of, the great big established religions. We're going to show that there's a very kind of powerful way of unifying all these kind of psychedelically influenced, essentially practices of humanity through neuroscience. We show basically a common factor. There's a common factor in all these substances we've talked about, every single one. Okay. By going into the neuroscience, we're going to show that there is a unifying common kind of way that all these substances act. And there's a common part of the brain that we can guess where it's acting to produce these effects. Okay, so let us talk about kind of psychedelics and neuroscience. Now, a lot of kind of research is focused on what's called a 5-HT2A receptor. It's to do with serotonin. Okay. So, you know, at the dawning of the psychedelic research, I mean, basically, you know, the dawning of psychedelic research in the 60s and 70s, the focus was really on kind of serotonin and LSD. And it was really on 5-HT2 and what's called 5-HT2A now. Now there is actually a good reason why this is the case, and it is very, very sensible that there is a part of the psychedelic experience which is very, very much mediated by 5-HT2A receptors. Let me explain two examples, okay, to show you why. Okay, the first one is the bright colors. Okay, it's trivial, isn't it? But it's very entertaining. But it's part of many psychedelic drugs. And the reason why is this, okay, why LSD and DMT produces those insanely bright colors, okay, it's so simple. You have in your retina, you have cones and rods, okay, the cones detect color. And the cones send the information, the color pathways into your optic nerve, and your optic nerve, your color pathways end up in a part of your primary visual cortex called 4C beta. Okay, and 4C beta is saturated with 5-HT2A receptors. Okay, so it's so reductionist, you know, so you tweak those receptors and the colors get brighter. Nothing hard to understand there. Okay, another kind of maybe I should have got some diagrams, but I don't. So okay, another kind of really powerful explanation for psychedelic use is what's called top-down, bottom-up pathways in the brain. Okay, let me explain what top-down, bottom-up means. Okay, you have primary sensory cortices. You have primary visual cortex, and you have secondary visual cortex, and you have tertiary visual cortex, and it goes up a hierarchy until you end up in the kind of language centers and your emotion centers. So that's bottom-up. You go from the bottom into sensory data, and you go into abstraction, i.e., language. Okay, so you go from, you know, you're looking at a cat. Then you can, you know, trigger the word cat in your head. You can say the word, you can write the word cat. So that's bottom up. Okay. Now, top down is when you go the other way, when you have concepts and then you form images from that concept. Now, suppose someone is hypnotizable and you say to that hypnotized person, you see a pink elephant in the room. Okay, that person will act like they see a pink elephant. They go, oh my God, there's a pink elephant in the room. Now, to someone who's not hypnotizable, that person won't react. Now, what's interesting is that the person who is completely hypnotizable, their primary visual cortex will light up. It's almost as if they're seeing a pink elephant in their primary visual cortex. Now, okay, the top-down pathway is mediated in a specific way. I was going to include a diagram, but I'll wave my arms about to describe the same concept. Okay, the top-down pathway for your what's called a cerebral cortex goes down a very stereotypical path, and it goes from going top down. It goes from what's called layer 5 of the 6 layers of cerebral cortex. It goes from layer 5 into what's called the plexiform layer 1. Okay, and neurons in the bottom parts they'll project up what's called an apical dendrite into layer 1. To receive the top-down projection. Now, these apical dendrites are saturated with 5-HT2A receptors, which means if you, through LSD, through DMT, you are boosting that top-down pathway. Now, I tell you some, it's almost if, you know, if you kind of project the idea of I see an elephant in the room, it's almost if the top-down pathway will project the image of an elephant into your primary visual cortex if you're hypnotizable. Now, okay, from personal experience, okay, on LSD, okay, even on quite weak doses, okay, Okay, the first time I had this in a really vivid, powerful way was in St Albans, of all places, Hertfordshire. We went for a walk, a friend and I. It was basically a morning. There was morning mist, and there was some fields, and there were some medieval ruins. Okay, and I kind of stopped to look in the morning mist across the lake, and the mist became knights and ladies. It was so incredibly vivid. It was like I was seeing, ghosts. I saw these people talking to each other. The details of the knight's armor, the details of the lady's dress, medieval dress. It was so incredibly vivid. But of course, I wasn't seeing ghosts. I knew I was LSD. Okay. Now, if I had some ergot and I didn't realize I was tripping, then you'd go, you would think you'd seen ghosts. But again, it's this kind of top-down projection. I saw medieval ruins in my head. I was thinking knights and ladies, kind of medieval stuff, and I saw into the mist. I saw these knights in the mist. Okay, and also the idea that when you open a fridge, the kind of like the fridge motor sounds like the most, kind of most incredible psychedelic trance music you've ever heard. No, it's not. It's just the fridge motor, but you're kind of projecting pattern upon the white noise. That's what you're doing. Okay, so that's a very kind of reductionist way of kind of explaining the psychedelic experience. But can it be the case that you can reduce the transcendent experience in this way? But that doesn't make sense, does it? How can you possibly, reduce the transcendent into the physical brain? How can it be that a finite brain can somehow correlate with an experience of the infinite? Oh, okay. So there's another explanation, which is to do with the idea that what psychedelics are doing is not really working in the same way as the 5-HT2A receptor, that this kind of reductionist way of explaining psychedelic use doesn't really extrapolate to the other entheogens. Okay, and there's a very simple reason why it can never do that, because one of the most important entheogens, which we talked about, lotus, okay, Egypt, ancient India, all over the place, this kind of lotus plant, okay, one of the most important psychedelics in world history, the active ingredient is called apomorphine. Okay, apomorphine sounds like an opioid. It's not. It's actually dopaminergic. Okay, but one of the things that apomorphine does, it explicitly blocks the action of the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor subtype. So even for just that reason, and there are many other reasons, just for that reason, it is not sensible to try and extrapolate the kind of 5-HT2A receptor hypothesis of psychedelic action into entheogens. We must look in other areas. And what's amazing is that research that has literally come out in the past 10 years has given us the kind of like data to finally work out exactly what is the common factor in all these psychedelic drugs. Okay, now we'll explain what it is. 25 years ago, I was really so trying to work out exactly what was happening, really. Complete nutcase. I mean, really, I was reading books on serotonin receptors, all the subtypes. I was really learning about everything. Everything I get my hands on about norepinephrine, acetylcholine. About 25 years ago, the information just didn't exist. Okay, we just didn't know where all these kind of different substances, where they bound onto exactly. But now we do. Okay, so I'm going to present this kind of unified theory or idea of why these entheogens do what they do. So I'm going to do another screen share now. So okay, so share screen, which is this diagram, but I'll go to the next diagram. Okay, so this diagram, I'm going to talk around this diagram for a bit. Okay, so here, okay, I hope you can see my cursor. I'm wiggling about on the diagram. Okay, so here, basically, in the first column, okay, numbers 1 to 6, we have practically all the really major kind of brain chemical pathways or systems in the brain. Okay, they're really diverse. They're all over the brain. They're everywhere. They're not localized. They're really, important chemical pathways. I mean, and in the second column, we have the substances, the binding chemicals, which bind onto the receptor types of those chemical systems. And in the kind of third column, we have the actual kind of substances associated with the actual active ingredients. Okay, Now, the first section of the talk, we talked about all kinds of things. We talked about ergot, we talked about kind of belladonna, witch's weed, fly agaric, cannabis, the lotus plant, okay. And we talked about indigenous religion. So peyote, San Pedro cactus is kind of, the active ingredient is mescaline. So we kind of like, presented a kind of like, universal overview of psychedelic use in world religion and world spiritual practice. Now, okay, what we'll do now, okay, is explain the unifying factor. We have all this diversity of substances and a diversity of plants and mushrooms, okay, and we have a diversity of chemical systems. What is the unifying factor? What is the common, what is the common factor behind all these kind of labels and names that can allow us to understand why these mystical experiences happen? Okay, and the answer emerges when we examine exactly the receptor subtypes they bind onto. Okay, now serotonin, okay, the 5-HT2A receptor we've talked about at length already with respect to LSD and the bright colors and the top-down pathway. But LSD also binds onto another receptor called 5-HT1A. Okay, now this is really important receptor. So the two main receptors is 5-HT2A and 5-HT1A. Okay. Now, the important thing about 5-HT1A is basically what's called an autoreceptor. Okay, so you have the kind of serotonin neurons. Okay, so basically you have the kind of axon, you have the nerve terminal. Okay. Now, the 5-HT1A autoreceptor exists at the nerve terminal, the axon bouton. And what 5-HT1A does, it provides a negative feedback signal to switch off the flow of serotonin. So it's stopping the serotonin from flowing. It has kind of inhibitory action. Okay, so that is 5-HT1A. Now, okay, norepinephrine is quite complicated because what norepinephrine does is actually it kind of boosts the bottom-up signal, which is something different from LSD, the top-down signal. But we think, even though, okay, this diagram is about mescaline, the receptor binding affinity, it's really binding onto what a chemical called, receptors for a chemical called norepinephrine, which is these two receptors here. So the binding affinity, it goes off the scale, plus 15, and also 5-HT2C. Now, we think that, okay, like LSD, it binds on to 5-HT2A. Okay, that's what we discussed a lot, but also binds on to 5-HT1A. Okay, this is the autoreceptor. This is where we think is where the action is going on in this kind of unified way of looking at things. And even though it binds onto norepinephrine, it does bind onto these LSD-like receptors. So if you want a kind of unified theory of serotonin as a kind of, explaining psychedelic action, then that unified theory can incorporate mescaline, okay, because of that link. Now, okay, but it doesn't incorporate apomorphine, as we already said. Apomorphine, the active ingredient in the blue lotus of the Nile, white lotus of China, the Far East, etc. Apomorphine basically antagonizes directly 5-HT2A, as we've already said, but also apomorphine, where apomorphine binds onto, is what's called the dopamine D2 receptor subtype. Okay. Now, the important thing about the D2, D3, D4 class is they, especially the D2 type, is they function again as the dopamine autoreceptor on the synaptic bouton. So again, it's kind of providing this negative feedback signal of shutting off the dopamine when it's too much, or kind of provide that negative feedback regulation of dopamine. So again, what apomorphine is doing is shutting off a normal functioning of a normal operation of a normal chemical system. Now, okay, cannabinoid. Okay, cannabinoid. Cannabis. There's no central cannabinoid neurons. Cannabis works. The cannabinoids work in a different way. Okay, basically, they are all retrograde transmitters. So you've got the synapse, you've got the pre-synapse, and you have the post-synapse. So what happens is that the cannabinoid is manufactured in the post-synapse, and they basically they kind of retrograde, pass backwards along the synapse. This is quite unusual. They go backwards, and they bind onto the CB1 receptor, which is also an autoreceptor that shuts off the flow of the signal in the pre-synapse. So do you see okay, in the first numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a common factor. They are all acting on this autoreceptor. They are all basically shutting off the normal flow of signal. They're acting they're inhibiting the normal action of these drugs, of these neurotransmitters, these neurochemicals. These drugs are kind of like basically interfering with the normal functioning of things. Okay. What's interesting is that all these autoreceptors, CB1 cannabinoid, D2 dopamine, and also 5-HT1A, they all actually work using by influencing the same kind of second messenger system in the presynapse. It's called, well, it involves adenylyl cyclase and cyclic AMP. So there's another kind of unifying factor, unifying view of all these separate receptors that are influenced by all these kind of substances we've talked about: ergot, peyote, lotus, cannabis, etc. So okay, we've kind of done a partial unification. Okay, now when it comes to witches' weeds, number 5, okay, this is different. Okay, this is different because what witches' weeds are doing, they're binding onto what's called the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor. Now, there's about half a dozen muscarinic acetylcholine receptor subtypes, and belladonna, henbane, mandrake, through atropine, scopolamine, hyoscyamine, they all antagonize all of the muscarinic receptors to various degrees. Okay, do you see? Again, it's kind of stopping the action, the normal action of acetylcholine. Now, acetylcholine is one of the systems that go with Alzheimer's disease. So you lose your acetylcholine neurons in your brainstem, then that's Alzheimer's disease. So it's kind of almost like stopping the normal role that acetylcholine plays. Okay, now in the last kind of row, fly agaric mushroom. Now, we said already that the acetylcholine muscarinic receptors named after the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Okay. Now, this is complicating because the muscarine in fly agaric is not the actual psychoactive agent in the fly agaric. Okay, I mean, it's when you actually take fly agaric mushroom, basically, then if you took enough fly agaric mushroom to get enough muscarine to have a psychoactive effect, then you're dead several times over. You're basically, you've taken so much poison. There's no surviving that. The actual active ingredient in fly agaric mushroom is actually muscimol. Okay, that's what's causing the psychedelic, the psychoactive effect. Now, where muscimol binds onto is a very widespread system called the gamma aminobutyric acid system, and it's everywhere because it's basically what inhibitory neurons, which is 20% of all your neurons, it's the main kind of neurotransmitter type. Now, the thing about a muscimol is doing something very, very special. Because benzodiazepines like Valium and also barbiturates and also alcohol, they all bind onto what's called a gamma aminobutyric acid A receptor subtype, and so does muscimol. But muscimol does it so in a very special way because all these other chemicals, they bind onto a separate site, whereas muscimol binds onto the actual site on the receptor that the actual GABA in the brain binds onto. So signal is transmitted using GABA aminobutyric acid. Your tranquilizers, your barbiturates, and your kind of like alcohol, they bind onto kind of auxiliary sites that kind of potentiate the signal. But what muscimol does, it rams itself into the actual GABA binding site and then forces the signal through. So, okay, I use it kind of like to explain how this works. If tranquilizers give you a bit of tranquil for a little bit, okay, very addictive substances, but it gives you a bit of tranquility. Alcohol gives you a bit of respite from your problems for a couple of hours maybe, and then you're back in your problems again. In a sense, muscimol theoretically gives you that peace that passeth all understanding. It gives you a mystical experience. Okay, look, all these substances, what they are doing, can you see? They are all inhibiting. They're all stopping the normal action of the brain. They're basically stopping something from happening. Now, but what is it stopping? What is it stopping? 10 years ago, there's a paper that came out from Imperial College, and what they were showing was that magic mushrooms was stopping the activity in the part of the brain called the default mode network. So that's an example of a kind of view of psychedelics that is kind of quite contrary, because people think psychedelics is mind manifesting to boost activity in the brain. That's one instance where academia was saying, no, psychedelics is suppressing something. We don't think it's the default mode network that's being suppressed. Okay, you can suppress a lot of things. You can suppress your primary visual cortex, and you go blind for a bit. You can suppress your your primary auditory cortex and you can't hear anything. You suppress your motor cortex, you can't move a part of your body. But that won't give you a transcendent experience. Why do these substances produce mystical experiences? We think, continuing from the last talk, that the default state is this idea that the default state is absolute monism. The default state is that you are the totality of all existence. The psychedelics is not producing or is not correlating with some brain state that's producing the state of being one with the universe or one with God, but rather that is your default state, and something is stopping that default state from happening. And we think that what's happening is what's being suppressed is exactly what the mystical traditions have been saying all along. And it's to do with this idea of paths of contraction and paths of expansion. And the basic idea is that in your life, you're trying to put out a flame, and that flame is the flame of fear and desire. Okay, that you can put out the flame by suppressing it, by suppressing the candle, by suppressing the flame, and then you can put it out somehow. Okay, not easy. So paths of contraction is stuff like going out into the desert, fasting for 40 nights, 40 days like Jesus in the desert to get that mystical experience. It's called living on air. It's called breatharianism. It's still, it's a practice in Tibetan Buddhism. It's like Buddha is meditations, kind of like an iconography of Buddha shows him in a very emaciated state. So if you don't eat for 40 days and 40 nights, okay, you can drink water, but you don't eat, you're going to be contracted. You're going to be near death. Okay, so something happens, you contract your life in order to get that mystical experience. And you're trying to put out that flame. Whereas paths of expansion says that you need to work through your life. You need to work through your fears, your desires in order to put out the flame. So that's more complex. So what we think is that psychedelics are effectively bypassing this paths of expansion, paths of contraction kind of process, and it's directly putting out the flame. And that means, where is fear and desire represented in the brain? Fear and desire is represented in the hypothalamus, in the amygdala, in the the kind of emotion centers of the cortex, which is what's called subgenual anterior cingulate cortex and posterior orbital frontal cortex. And it's a kind of spectrum, and it kind of spreads out to the rest of the brain. So all the brain is influenced by emotions, but there's the kind of emotion centers. So what we say is that what these psychedelics are doing, they are suppressing this engine of the mind, this central kind of engine which drives all behavior. So in any kind of normal state of being, you're driven by these engines of the mind, amygdala, hypothalamus, and these kind of cortical emotion areas. So what we think is going on is that these psychedelics are suppressing the flame. And by completely blotting out the flame using these autoreceptors, using the GABA binding site, and totally snuffing out acetylcholine in this kind of part of the brain, then we believe that is what's releasing the kind of consciousness to become infinite. As William Blake said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, then you'd see things as they are, infinite. And we think that, kind of connecting with the esoteric traditions, what's being put out is fear and desire. It's essentially the driving kind of engine of your behavior. Okay, so I'm going to stop this share. And okay, my gosh, we to keep a close eye on the time. Oh gosh, that's 1 hour. My gosh, a lot of this is new material, so I don't know exactly how long this talk's going to be. Okay, so just let me one more screen share. Okay, one more screen share, and then we'll break for some questions. We'll break for some Q&A. Okay, so this is okay. I love this diagram. This is something that came up on my Facebook feed. Okay, so that's kind of like, Rubik cube as a kind of a metaphor for enlightenment. So this guy wants to become enlightened, and he's gone to the guru, and he's meditating in the cave. So that's like a path of contraction. You've taken yourself away from life in order to get, just kind of solving the puzzle of life, and you've gone into a cave. So that's like a path of contraction. And there's another way of solving the Rubik cube, which I actually did as a little boy myself, and it's actually a cheap method. It's this. So we think that psychedelic drugs is this. It basically, you cheat. You basically unravel the kind of Rubik cube directly. And then, okay, the metaphor breaks down, okay, because the psychedelic drug wears off and you're back to the scrambled Rubik cube again. But it's a metaphor, okay, metaphors are never perfect, okay. So anyway, that's the basic idea. But we think that the powers of expansion is such that the Rubik cube, okay, it is this, that the Rubik cube, with powers of expansion, to move the Rubik cube, you actually physically have to change your life. You have to change your surroundings. You have to go out into the world to move the pieces of the Rubik cube. So we think that's what powers of expansion involve. So that's something we'll discuss in the second part of the talk. We'll discuss a whole lot of things if we have time. My God, that's 1 hour. That didn't feel like 1 hour, but that's 1 hour. Okay, I thought it was going to be 45 minutes. But anyway, is there any questions and answers? Or else we'll crack on. Any questions you want to ask? Just unblock your microphones.
Either way, I have a question.
Matt, great to hear you.
Yes. All right. Yes, I'm actually going to an airport right now. So I might have like a mask on later or something.
Man, cool.
I've heard. What would your response be to the question, like, why do these plants exist that give people different experiences? That seems to be something that's kind of mysterious and kind of perplexes scientists.
Oh yeah, that is a great question. The reason it perplexes scientists, because basically scientists have this normal view of causality, that things go forwards in time. So people wonder, why should these psychedelic experiences and why should these psychedelic plants exist to produce psychedelic experiences? And the reason, the kind of explanation comes from what we discussed in the last talk, which we'll just recap for people who didn't attend that talk. The explanation has to do with this counterclock big bounce idea, which is supported by science, that time flows backwards and forwards, that there is, we discussed the destiny wave function. Okay, in the Corpus Hermeticum, there's this very fundamental idea in the Corpus Hermeticum in a book called Asclepius, which is part of that whole nexus of books, which is to do with Hermetic wisdom from ancient Egypt. The reason why is because of what's called kind of backward causality. Now, the idea is that basically what is first is destiny. And from destiny comes, as it says in these books, destiny first, then necessity. And then from destiny and necessity comes the order of the universe. So psychedelic plants exist because mechanisms, doorways need to be there in order to awaken people as the one God. Okay, does that make sense, Matt?
Yes, it is. Good answer.
I mean, forward causality, it's nonsense, Terence McKenna's been talking about this for years, and he's dismissed as a complete crank that there's no reason why psilocybin mushrooms should contain so much psilocybin. Even, people like Sam Harris and Peter Jordanson are kind of investigating this kind of ground now. It baffles them. But with this kind of counterclock explanation of the past, the future causing the past, then you see what's happening around us exists through the necessity of producing the future. And if the future necessity is that basically we become awakened as God, as people, and as the planet, and as the great awakening in the future of the cosmic Christ, then necessarily the evolution of the planet is seeded with that which will enable that thing to happen necessarily. Okay, is there any other question? Amazing, you're calling on the way to the airport, man. That's so cool. Okay, any other questions?
Hi, I got a question. Greetings here from Oxford, England.
Oh, hi, who's that?
It's Julie Alejandro. I'm a university lecturer in
great.
Intelligence. And my question is regarding longevity and aging. And if longevity and aging was understood or analyzed within this psychedelics, within religion, within any of the religions, and if currently in modern science, there's any connection between gerontology, aging, longevity, and the psychedelics that you presented or expressed today.
Like
that's mTOR, really... AMPK, the sirtuin activators, David Sinclair, health span, lifespan.
I think if you knew you were God, you'd be less stressed in life, and I think you'd live longer. So I think what Jung said was that at people's kind of heart of their kind of psychoses and their kind of psychological problems was a lack of a kind of like a kind of religion, essentially, a kind of like a kind of feeling of the transcendent, of the eternal. So I don't know about psychedelics prolonging life at a chemical level, but I think on a psychological level, I think the idea that basically you give people a kind of kind of sense of the transcendent for the 21st century, a sense of eternity. I think that you can't really you're doing the world a big favor. And I think when you understand about eternal life and these things, you're less worried about death, I think. So I don't have a really answer for you, because I don't really know about any research that kind of directly kind of like causes life extension. But I think psychologically, in terms of well-being, I mean, I think it definitely, and this is actually research being done in academia, it enables people to handle death better and live this life better, I think, with what you got. Okay, so that's not quite an answer, but that's the best I can do. Any other questions?
Hey, Wyatt, it's Ollie.
Hey, Ollie, hi. good to hear from you.
Yeah, how you doing? Good. So my question is about, I guess it's about nitrous oxide.
Okay.
I've just read the book, Recapture the Rapture by Jamie
Wheel. Yeah.
It's great. Have you read it?
No, I've not read it, but I mean, we're in the same, we're on the same side, basically. Well, I disagree with some of his ideas, but we're on the same basic side,
Yeah, okay. So yeah, he talks about how some of the research from the 60s, Stan Groff and etc. They were looking at psychedelics, but also breath work.
Okay.
And how breath work can bring about just as strong psychedelic experiences. Yeah. And then Jamie goes on to suggest that tweaking breath work with substances such as nitrous oxide, which degrades in the brain to nitric oxide, can have this sort of emancipatory hallucinogenic sort of peak state. So the question is, obviously, nitrous oxide is quite a modern discovery. It was like Humphrey Davy in Devon, who famously sort of commented on it, and even Winston Churchill tried it because he tried it in hospital, and he was like, "This is amazing," and he waxed lyrical about it.
Yeah, I had a psychedelic trance party in Paris, okay, and it was a great big tubers, the damn stuff, and I was playing with this band Cosmosis, and they were really plying us with. Well, no, I mean, the guys with, Bill Halsey didn't really take drugs, but I was more open to experimenting, and it had this big canister, and I did it a lot, and it was pretty intense, yeah.
Yeah, laughing gas, basically, right? It's,
right.
It's what the paramedics use, so it's pretty available.
Yeah.
So my question is, is that like, would you include that as a kind of entheogen, modern day entheogen, like that's maybe more available than and legal than a lot of these substances?
Well, I think breath work, and also kind of like these gases like nitrous oxide, and also the idea that the Oracle of Delphi, it was basically hydrocarbon gases from this hydrocarbon vent on which the temple was built, and also the Sibyl of Rome, the prophetess of Rome, was living in volcanic caves, just breathing in these kind of hydrocarbon gases, and I think these I don't know exactly the kind of mechanism. But there's a paper from Ukraine, of all places, that said that ethylene, which was basically one of the gases in Delphi, and also in these kind of volcanic caves, did kind of interact with the muscarinic receptors. That is, kind of like needs more explaining. So there could be some direct chemical link like that. But I think something like nitrous oxide and oxygen starvation, or kind of like high, CO2 or whatever, will do things to your hypothalamus, amygdala, etc. And one of the things that hyperventilating and controlling your breath can do is panic attacks. Okay, so vice versa, theoretically, with the right mindset and right breathing techniques, you can reverse that to totally calm those centers. Then theoretically, in this kind of like kind of unified view, you can also bring that fear and desire thing, the candle, to a total stillness. Does that make sense? So potentially, yes. I mean, in terms of like, yeah, nitric oxide, I mean, you know, apomorphine is actually used for Parkinson's disease, okay? You know, apomorphine, the active ingredient in blue lotus. Now in the psychiatric literature, it warns of side effects, it warns of confusion, okay? Now, you know, nitrous oxide can produce mystical experiences in some people, and probably apomorphine, you know, refined active ingredient from the lotus plant, in these case studies, psychiatric case studies, I mean, probably some of these people would have reported, oh my God, I became one with the universe. I became one with God. Okay, the psychiatrist won't write on his clipboard, that the patient had a genuine mystical religious experience. The psychiatrist will write, the patient was confused. Oh no, side effect confusion. Do you get it? Okay, so I can guess that, you know, these substances, I didn't quite get a mystical experience from this nitric oxide. Had loads and loads of it. I you know, they applied it on me. They really wanted to, you know, impress me with the what, you know, the psychoactives, and I really didn't get a mystical experience, but it was lots and lots of fun. Yeah. Okay, does that answer your question, Ollie? That's kind of okay. If there's one more question, then we'll kind of move on. This is about 2 hours of material to get through, but we'll do like what we can. But if there's another question, or else we'll move on. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question.
Oh, Sam, but you're a psychiatrist. Oh my God. No offense. No,
none, because I'm not very in line with the sort of reductionist viewpoint. But
okay. Well, if you can get some apomorphine, let me know. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, sure. So I was going to ask you about your perspective about sort of a networked view of looking at the brain, because I really started to think about that a lot after reading your book. Yeah. And the way I think about, you know, the sort of serotonin explanation or the receptor explanation of diseases, it's sort of like trying to explain how the internet works by talking about Apple computers.
Okay.
Like it's looking at one end terminal and it's completely ignoring the entire architecture and the flow of information.
Yeah.
I really resonated with what you were saying about the psychedelics sort of like stopping the inhibition of like feeling that you're connected to everything, because essentially the brain, the only way you know that you're separate from the table is because your brain is telling you that you're separate from the table. If there's parts of the brain that are lost, then all of a sudden you can't tell whether this is your hand or whether this is the table, or whether you're doing the action or not doing the action. Like there's something called alien hand syndrome, where you know, there's all sorts of kind of, when the brain sort of, the architecture changes, then all of a sudden the sort of view that you're separate, that you're completely separate from everything else, it starts to really dissolve. Yeah, I was just curious about your thoughts.
Oh, I mean, there are other explanations to why people have these at one of the universe experiences. I mean, for instance, Michael Persinger, who does stuff with magneto scans, or you know, these magnetic machines that can actually suppress brain behavior. And his idea is that basically, oh yeah, you suppress the parietal lobes, which do with spatial reasoning. Therefore, by suppressing it, you somehow create this kind of illusion of being one of the universe. But I think it really. It is when you have these experiences, it's very hard then to believe that the brain could possibly contain these kind of this kind of volume of information, really. So I think, you know, I think there is that reductionist thing we talked about earlier with respect to serotonin and top-down pathways, and with respect to the color pathways and stuff. But I think really the mystical experience really is something which cannot really be rooted in the brain. So I know that's very outside the kind of you know, the kind of mainstream view of things. But that's why, I mean, I don't know if you saw the last talk we presented as other metaphysical cosmological view, but if you start that as your default assumption, then instead of saying, you know, here is the brain, and then the brain produces consciousness, by looking at this, what I believe is another equally valid viewpoint, then really it is about kind of taking away the kind of certain functionings which are really stopping you from seeing these experiences, rather than you know, manipulating your brain to produce specific correlations like color pathways, etc. Does that make sense? Or have I misunderstood your question?
I think that I'm a lot closer to your viewpoint than you think. I don't actually think that the brain is like creating this artificial experience that you're connected to. What my perception is that the artificial experience is the brain telling you that you're separate. The brain is like masking, like, because the way that I see things, I see sort of the universe as fractal, the body is fractal. We're infinitely connected to everything constantly. And it's sort of like you can have different viewpoints or different frames of reference or resolution at which you're looking at something. And at that, ultimately, everything is like infinitely connected. And you can look at it from like a macro level or a micro level, but ultimately they're all part of the same kind of universal connection. And that the brain sort of, I guess, depending on the states of the brain, you can either see that connection or not see that connection to everything. So
right. Well, Sab, I'll tell you from personal experience is that, one of the things I learned in my little journey, in my 20s, experimenting mainly with LSD in terms of mystical sacrament, was that it's very hard to bring the experience back to the rational mind, back to the rational world. And it's also the rational mind cannot connect with the experience. I'll tell you a funny story where, for years I'd had these experiences, but the experience wouldn't integrate into your life. But it's only a few years after having dozens of these experiences that I was in Kassel, of all places, in Germany. I tagged along with a rave organization called Escape from Samsara. It's quite a mystical title for a rave organization. And basically, it was a weekend. I was recovering from a whole bunch of hedonistic, not very spiritual kind of experimentation. And I was exhausted. And basically in Kassel, I was hundreds of miles from home. I was disoriented. It was on that road to Damascus. It was like I was straight. I wasn't on any drug. I was recovering. My mind was exhausted. But in that state, I first had glimmers where my rational mind could finally pick up some of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that normally your rational mind just cannot perceive, it just cannot. So I spent the past like 20 years kind of continuing along these lines. So I think the network in your brain can be configured in such a way that even though that information is not infinite, what we can do is that you can basically interpret everything that's finite about the world, about politics, about religion, about science, and you can make it point towards that infinite transcendent experience. So I think you can rearrange that network of, kind of like a network in your brain of finite knowledge to point towards something transcendent, even though that knowledge itself is not transcendent. Does that make sense?
I guess kind of, I guess the way I see things, because I've been trying to learn about fractals a lot more recently, and I sort of see like that there's sort of like things that are just infinity and discreteness are not necessarily like totally separate. Because you can have things that are discrete, but they have like infinite measurements, or it depends on your sort of like viewpoint. So I think that, I don't know, I think I see them as like more things are more connected, more of like a non-dual sort of viewpoint. And also because I've had some awakening type experiences, I've tried mushrooms in the past, but I also had just an awakening experience where all of a sudden I was doing a lot of meditation and was kind of talking to a lot of non-dual teachers, and all of a sudden started to feel like my body was like moving on its own, like everything was connected, like the person walking towards me on the sidewalk, we were one and the same. It was a very universal experience. And you're right that like in the day-to-day, like a lot of the times, like I can't feel that all the time. I would like never get anything done if I was feeling that all the time, because I was kind of losing track of time, losing track of the days. But this talk has been very interesting, and sort of like tying all these things together of how people can access that feeling, which is something that people kind of chase to kind of get that again and try to understand sort of a nature of reality. So
the trick is really to kind of like get the psychedelic experience without the psychedelics. I think that's the real trick. I think I guess we'll kind of like discuss that in the next part of the talk, unless there's any more I guess there'll be Q&A at the end, so we're going to really have a long Q&A at the end. Actually, that went on for quite a while, so we're going to, oh gosh, it's an hour and a half already. Let us crack on. Let us go to the next section of the talk. Okay, I mean, it's probably another. We're going to do as much as we can. We're probably going to have a skimming stone over a lot of this, but we're going to basically just talk about paths of expansion. Okay, we're going to have cut out a lot of material. Talk about paths of expansion. If paths of contraction is what psychedelics in a sense is doing transiently, then we've got to talk about paths of expansion. And what is that? Okay, so we're going to crack on into the next part. So let me screen share. Okay, so that's the cheap method of what we think psychedelics are doing. Okay. Now, okay, we're going to try and kind of present kind of like a unified picture of what is paths of expansion. And these paths of expansion, it's universal. It's not just Eastern mysticism, Tibetan Tantra, Vajrayana. It is also Kabbalah in more in the West, and it's also what it says in the Corpus Hermeticum, which is, there should be a connection between Kabbalah, if it's the hidden teachings of Moses, Egyptian prince, and Corpus Hermeticum, if it derives from ancient Egypt. So we suspect that if that's the case, then there should be a connection, which we think is absolutely the case. Okay, so we think that in all these kind of like mystical traditions, they are basically saying essentially the same thing. Okay, what they're saying is this. Okay, in the earlier diagram that we showed the kind of outer mysteries and inner mysteries. Okay, the inner mysteries, the central belief is that you are God. It's basically absolute monism. Okay, that's the central belief in a world religion. Now, so all these kind of like spiritual traditions, they all have these explanations. They all have these kind of paths for why you can achieve these states of being one with God that don't involve psychedelic drugs. Okay, no, I believe that there is a place for psychedelic drugs, and I'll explain why. Because, okay, all of these paths, the central aim is to become one with God, but one of the central keys to becoming one with God is that you're essentially told what the goal is. Okay, so the diagram shows you basically what's called the causal paths and the resultant paths. So this is from Tibetan Tantra, but it really extrapolates to all world religion. Essentially, causal path means that you don't know what the goal is. You're not told that you are God. Basically, you're told to behave, be nice, be right living, right this, kind of moral compassion and all this kind of like moral instruction and stuff. But you're not told what the goal is. You might be given an idea. Oh yeah, many kind of reincarnations, and there'll be something good at the end of it. There might be pie in the sky when you die, but you're actually not told what the actual central truth is. The resultant paths, you're actually told the goal. Okay, so in the tantras in India, one of the initiations, you're basically told you are God, and that's your initiation, and the guru disappears, and you're left on your own. You basically have to find your way to realizing the truth. In the Tibetan Tantras imported from India, I mean, there's more of an ecclesiastical hierarchy over the centuries that's kind of maintained the original teaching. So this kind of resultant path idea is basically, yeah, you're told that you are the Buddha nature, or you're the kind of the deity. So it's something called deity yoga. But the same applies to the Kabbalah, the received tradition in Judaism, where you're only told if you're over 40 years old in these kind of like Hasidic communities, and if you're of sound mind, or if you're kind of like developed enough. But also in the Corpus Hermeticum, it says explicitly in chapter 10 that this knowledge of God is the only means of deliverance. And in chapter 13, it tells you what this knowledge of God is. They call it piety. But this knowledge of God piety is not the kind of piety I go to church every Sunday and I kind of like read the Bible and pray. The piety it describes in chapter 13 is the piety that can get you killed, get you ridiculed, and get you laughed at. It's basically the knowledge of God, to know that you are God. So that's quite explicit in the Corpus Hermeticum. Now, okay, what all these traditions also say is basically you basically have to, all the aspects of your life you have to basically concentrate on and to shape in the image of God. Now, there's a book called Nordic Secret, and they describe this thing called Bildung. Okay, Bildung is, they think it's adult education. In the book, they actually explicitly say that, yes, Bildung, the origin of the word, means to shape in the image of God. And they think it meant, they think it now means in, they think it means in Sweden, in Scandinavia, they think it kind of means holistic adult education with kind of, participation in society and kind of like political activism. But historically, Bildung meant to shape yourself in the image of God. Okay, now how do you do this? Basically, you take all the aspects of your being, which basically means thinking, doing, and feeling. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita, there's 3 kinds of paths. There's Jnana marg to do with thinking, there's Bhakti marg to do with feeling, and there's Karma marg to do with action. Now, it's not one or the other. Basically, we all feel, we all do, and we all think. It's just basically a matter of emphasis. Some people will be in their heads, and your path is going to be probably more thinking, more analytical. Some people are more action, some people are more feeling. And you know, the myths of Europe. There's one telling of the kind of like the myths of the Grail, where okay, 3 knights find the Grail. Okay, Beaufort is the thinking knight, Galahad is the action knight, and Percival is the feeling knight, pure of heart. And we see in the Corpus Mescum to know, to think and to act and to believe and to feel and to all these dimensions is the proper right way to the good and the divine. So it's saying that basically thinking, feeling, and acting is basically the path to divinity. And as we explained in the last talk, the first chapter, Pymander is actually explicitly saying that basically what the magic of the Corpus Hermeticum is about is this union with God idea, kind of becoming one with the Father. So what we have then is kind of like commonality of this idea that you basically you know what the result is, but somehow you must shape your life, the dimensions of your life, in order to achieve that goal. In terms of Buddhism, okay, there is kind of tantric Buddhism, but there's also Buddha's kind of eightfold path, which is the same thing. It's basically, you know, thinking, feeling, and acting, but it's kind of listed 8 points: right action, right livelihood, right thinking, right attitude, etc., etc. It's like a kind of coffee shop loyalty card. You got 8 boxes with the coffee shop I go to. You tick 8 boxes, you get a free coffee. And you tick Buddha's 8 points, you become enlightened theoretically. So this idea of shaping yourself in the image of God is basically a universal idea. But what does that involve? Okay, what it involves is this thing called deity yoga. And again, this is universal. It extrapolates to all religions. In the Tibetan Tantras and also in India, this is idea called deity yoga. You basically, when you know the result, then basically the deity yoga involves reaffirming the idea of the truth in your mind, in all your life, in all the waking moments of your life. And what you're doing is you're using the idea of who you are, shape your behavior, your feelings, and your thoughts. Okay, so this is a kind of meditation kind of tool called the Goddess of the Void. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to project yourself into the Goddess of the Void. And you're supposed to kind of project a God self. So it's a deity yoga. You're having a kind of like a image of God. So a kind of very popular one is Guan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, this kind of like a Buddha of kind of compassion. Another one might be the green Tara, who's more kind of like to do with thinking and stuff, and it's more kind of like a intellect. And in India, I mean, this is a kind of mixing traditions, but Shiva is the popular one for many mystics. So one of the meditations is Shivoham, Shivoham, Shivoham. He spent hours and hours chanting Shivoham, and it means I am Shiva, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. The idea is reaffirmation of the idea. And basically, deity yoga is basically you're trying to see the idea in your mind so much that the idea transforms you, over a long period of time. You're shaping yourself in the image of God. Now, here's the catch. Now, here's the difficult part. Okay, here's the really difficult part. The difficult part of the path of expansion, okay, is that what you're supposed to do is that you're supposed to then take that meditation into real life. So the idea is basically you're supposed to live this divine self in the real life. And as it says in the Corpus Hermeticum, if you really do live it in a kind of way that's explicit, you're going to get killed or ridiculed. So that's the kind of challenge of the age and a challenge through history. You're basically trying to manifest this God self, but you're trying to navigate the physical world. And if you navigate the physical world, you're going to come against resistance. You're going to come against kind of like political and ecclesiastical authorities. You're going to come against people. You're going to come against the kind of like having to find a job and have to pay taxes and stuff. So really, this is the kind of path of expansion, and it's not easy. Okay, so what is this path of expansion? What does it really involve? Okay, so what we think it involves, and we're going to just because we're running out of time, we're going to skip over to the next section, which we think there's something fundamental about the path of expansion, which relates back to what we were talking about earlier about the fear and desire, about kind of stilling the flame. Now here, you're entering into life, okay, and you're having this ideas of kind of non-duality, and somehow you must translate this kind of this Shiva personality or this Avalokiteshvara kind of deity yoga self into real life. And that's really, really hard. Okay. Also, that diagram is just to show that the mythic quest hero could be another kind of deity yoga meditating kind of focus. So this is not a total joke. I mean, Luke Skywalker is someone that people understand in terms of religion. So many people in the census in the UK, they put Jedi on the census for their religion. It means that basically you pick the kind of like the representation of the kind of spiritual aspirant, whether it's Shiva, a mythic quest hero, or kind of like a tantric deity or a kind of Tibetan deity, and basically you pick the one that suits you the best, that works for you. Okay, that's the idea of this diagram. Okay, so okay, what you're faced with is basically this ideal world of non-duality. And you're faced with basically existing world structures that don't recognize your divinity, which includes organized religion, which includes the religion of states, the Catholic Church, the kind of the kind of ideas of the time, and your mother and your friends, and the tax man. You have to face all these people. And okay, so the next section of the talk is going to go into this idea that really this. We talk about fear and desire being suppressed by psychedelic drugs, and you talk about fear and desire being contracted through the path of contraction, meditating in the cave and starving yourself for 40 days in the desert. The path of expansion necessarily involves something called the cosmic battle between good and evil. Okay, this is what I'm going to explain in the next talk. It's when you have fear and desire, when this is expressed in the real world, then it really is like a battle. It's like a struggle. It's like a jihad, which means effort and struggle. Okay, so I'm going to explain in the next section of the talk. Just keep my eye close on the time, so we're not talking 4 hours. Probably less than that. Okay. Okay, this diagram. Let me go through this diagram. Okay, this kind of. Now this kind of connects with the kind of earlier talks, but we'll kind of like concentrate on these names. Okay, so let me explain this diagram. Okay, so this diagram is really to show the revision of the ideas of good and evil that appeared in the Renaissance and were developed by these very kind of like important people, I think. Okay, so this seems a world away from our talk about psychedelics now, but I'll connect it together at the end. Okay, you see at the top of the diagram, okay, the very top of the diagram, we have we have these ideas of the Renaissance. Okay, so the corpus mysticum we've talked about a lot. The oration on the dignity of man, with the manifesto of the Renaissance, which really brought many of the ideas of the corpus mysticum into the mainstream for some of the leading lights of the English, French, German and Italian Renaissance. And there are these Knights Templars who basically lived in the Levant, and they married, kind of Nizari assassin kind of Ishmaelis. Basically, they married, they intermingled, they kind of like absorbed their kind of ideas, and they brought it back to Europe. Okay, eventually the Knights Templars were kind of they were executed, they were hunted down and killed by the French king. But they brought back these mystical ideas from the Sufis in the Levant, and also the Ishmaelis, back to the assassin sect, the Hashashin. And another thing they brought back was a thing called Abraxas. It's in the kind of like the most inner seals. It's basically a conception of God which goes back way back to ancient Egypt. Maybe something Moses would have understood fully, and it's the conception of God which unifies good and evil. Okay. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism became the vehicles for the kind of like transmission of these ideas into Europe over several hundred years. So let me go into the diagram now. Okay, let me go into this diagram proper. Now we're back to Star Wars at the end. We'll explain. Okay, we'll explain what the connection is. Okay, essentially all these names, they are part of a process of the re-examination of what is the nature of good and evil. Okay, so we're going to have to go through this. And what they're really challenging, let me explain the outset, they're really challenging the notion of good and evil presented by the Catholic Church, because this is all based in Europe, isn't it? And some of the Protestant churches, like the Church of England. Now, essentially, what the Catholic Church is saying is anything we don't like is evil. We say what is evil, and we say what is good. So, pay your taxes, that is good. Don't pay your taxes, that's evil. There's a kind of like original sin. You were born in sin, and by paying your tithes and through intercession, through worshiping, through the priest, through the Catholic Church, you can be saved. And it's like it's like a protection racket. There's nasty people out there that they're going to break your windows. Give us a bit of money every month, and we can stop those nasty people from breaking your windows. So it's kind of like it is a control system. I'm not saying anything new here. This is what most people understand. There's a notion of good and evil, which basically was presented by the the powers that be, and these ideas is not really for your spiritual enlightenment. They're really for control. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, I'm not saying anything, I'm not offering any great insight. But what these people here did was they really challenged that existing kind of idea. And many of these people were involved in these kind of like organizations like Freemasonry. Let's go through these names. I mean, just to give you an idea of what I mean. Okay. Let's start in the Anglo-Saxon world. These are mainly German-speaking thinkers. Now, William Blake, okay, he believed himself to be a real prophet, and I think he's right. I think he really was a real prophet. Now, he wrote a book called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, okay, and in his artwork, he depicted Abraxas. Okay, so he obviously was familiar with Abraxas, and he's basically trying to resurrect these kind of old ideas. Okay, now in his Marriage of Heaven and Hell, you can give an entire lecture on his works, but I mean, he's re-examining the kind of like traditional notions of morality, basically, and he's quite outrageous. He'll say things like, the reason, quote or paraphrase, the reason why Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote about angels and God, and wrote freely when he wrote about kind of like demons and hell. He says because he was a true poet and he was of the devil's party without knowing it. Now that sounds really outrageous, but what did he mean? Okay, what did he mean by that? We'll explain as we go along. Okay. Von Goethe, okay, in the German-speaking world, he wrote a book called Faust. Okay, this is very famous work. Okay, again, you can give a entire lecture on Faust, very deep work. But basically what he did, he took the existing story of Faust, which existed for hundreds of years, he twisted the ending. In the original story, Faust, okay, does horrible things, in his quest for power, sending a soul to the devil, causes the woman he lusted after, causes her to die, the baby dies, her mother dies, brother dies, ghastly stuff. And in the original story, he goes to hell, okay. Now, Goethe's version, he changes it, and basically Faust is saved. Now, it's complicated. I'll explain, it's complicated. Okay, I'm not trying to promote evil, I'm trying to explain that there is this battle between good and evil going on in people's minds. Okay, so I've got to be careful here. Okay, now Goethe massively influenced this guy called Hegel. We've spoken a lot about Hegel, about Marxism, and about his dialectic. Now he got the dialectic from a guy called Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who's the father of German idealism, along with Immanuel Kant. Okay. So the idea of dialectic of thesis, and then you have this antithesis, almost like antichrist, antithesis, challenges the thesis, and a new synthesis emerges, and then the synthesis degenerates, and a new antithesis has to challenge that. So like a cosmic battle that kind of like leads to kind of like a progress, and what Hegel called the absolute. And Hegel was massively influenced by Goethe and Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Now, interestingly, Goethe and Fichte, they were both Freemasons. Actually, they were actually members of the same lodge in Zurich. Okay, so that's an interesting aside. So they really were familiar with these kind of Renaissance kind of ideas, which filtered through organizations like Freemasonry. I'm not going to comment. I don't want to say anything about what the state of Freemasonry is today. But 200-300 years ago, Freemasonry was something completely different. And they really were interested in the kind of, hidden mysteries and Hermetic religion. Okay. Now, Goethe massively influenced a guy called Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote his most famous work, probably called Beyond Good and Evil. Okay, to summarize the last line, the world laughs, the ancient curtains torn, light and dark are wedded as one. Now, doesn't that reflect William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell? Well, he's covering the same kind of ground. He's kind of re-examining our traditional notions of good and evil. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche massively influenced Carl Gustav Jung. And okay, he's a huge name now, because I mean, he's massive now because of Jordan Peterson, who's really made him very, very trendy. And also Friedrich Nietzsche massively influenced a guy called Hermann Hesse, okay, who wrote Endymion, a whole bunch of other books, Glass-Bead Games, Steppenwolf, Siddhartha, hugely influential Nobel Prize winning author who wrote these kind of spiritual, mystical books. Now let me explain. Okay, they're both huge fans of Friedrich Nietzsche, but Carl Gustav Jung and Hermann Hesse, they were massively into this idea, or this kind of concept called abraxas. Okay, this is really interesting, isn't it? They were massively into this thing called abraxas. Now, okay, now, oh yeah, oh, no, I don't want that diagram. Okay, I've got to shift this bunch of, okay, now look, Carl Gustav Jung, okay, something came out in 2009, just 13 years ago. Okay, he died in 1961. It's called The Red Book. Okay, his family forbid its publishing because it's too hot to handle. They wanted to protect his reputation. So what did the Red Book say? Okay, I mean, get it, read it, because it's mind-blowing. Carl Jung said that basically the Red Book was really what his teaching was all about, that it was the most important part of his life. He wrote it around kind of like the kind of 1910s, 1920s, okay. And the Red Book, around that time when he was writing the Red Book, he wrote to Hermann Hesse, who wrote the book Endymion. And he sang the praises. He thought, gushing praise for his book Endymion. Now, the Red Book, the final chapter, basically, Jung says what he's all about all along. He goes full Gnostic. He's saying basically his prime objective was to try and awaken the God in people. Okay, so Jung actually paid for the translation of many Gnostic texts and the recovery of the Nag Hammadi library that was found in Egypt. Okay, so he was very into Gnosticism. But the Red Book, it tells us that he wasn't just interested, it was his religion. And in the final chapter, it tells us that he was really trying to revive the religion of Gnosticism, and also in particular, the religion of Abraxas for the 20th century. So in the final chapter, he really goes full Abraxas. He basically says, look, Abraxas is the hidden God and the true God that was waiting to be revealed all along, that God that combines good and evil. Now, Hermann Hesse's book Endymion is all about reviving the God of Abraxas for the 21st century, this ancient conception of God from ancient Egypt. And this idea that basically what Hermann Hesse and Carl Jung was saying was basically, they weren't telling you to be, they weren't promoting evil. They're saying basically there is evil in us and there's a battle between good and evil that needs to be resolved. And it involves our passions, it involves our desires. But it's no good trying to suppress those passions, they're saying. Basically, you have to integrate the shadow, you have to work them through. And it's a path of expansion. You have to expand out into the world and deal with it. Deal with this kind of like dark side. Okay. Now, okay, Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, was massively influenced by Carl Gustav Jung. He actually studied under a psychologist lady near San Francisco, who actually studied under Carl Jung. And Frank Herbert actually read her original notes from lecture notes from her studies with Carl Jung. So Carl Jung massively influenced Frank Herbert to write Dune. And, you know, the character in Dune, the hero is actually an anti-hero. And Joseph Campbell, also massively influenced by kind of Carl Jung, wrote the monomyth, which is essentially this idea of a kind of, you know, a kind of a mythic cycle of stasis and then a kind of degeneration. The mythic hero has to then restore Camelot. Almost like it is dialectic. It is basically the thesis decays, the antithesis has to emerge, and new Camelot emerges, etc. So myth cycle dialectic is actually really the same idea. In turn, Frank Herbert and Joseph Campbell are really influenced George Lucas. Essentially, Star Wars is derived from Dune. Okay, think Tatooine, think desert planet, moisture farming, sand crawlers, that he thought his dad was Luke Skywalker thought his dad was a spice freighter pilot, spice freighter. You see, I can go on and on. I mean, books are written about the parallels between Dune and Star Wars. So, you know, great artists steal, lesser artists borrow. George Lucas essentially stole from Frank Herbert, and he basically, you know, admitted he basically stole from a hero with 1,000 faces. And that's what Star Wars is. so you find that the characters in Star Wars, they're not quite kind of totally squeaky clean. That Luke Skywalker confronts his kind of worst demon in the cave in Dagobah. He slays Darth Vader, and then behind the mask was Luke all along, he discovers. Han Solo is not a kind of like hero, he's an anti-hero. Kind of, the original Star Wars, he shoots Green Greedo before, Green Greedo makes a move. He's basically like a killer, and then, but the good, the bad turns to good turns to bad. What they're saying is this kind of complex interaction between good and evil. Okay, Herman Melville, okay, we missed someone out. Herman Melville wrote a book called Moby Dick. And Herman Melville, like Moby Dick, like William Blake, he said towards the end of his life, he said, "I've written the gospel for my time, but yet I die a pauper." He knew he was writing a religious book. Okay. And the character, the main character in Moby Dick, his name is Captain Ahab. That's the giveaway. Ahab is this wicked king in the Old Testament. Now, Ahab is the hero, is the main character, but there's something quite dark about Ahab. Okay, let me linger with Moby Dick because it's a really important book. We think it contains this idea of the battle between good and evil, and we think it contains really what the outer mysteries and the kind of like inner mysteries are really talking about. This kind of like this kind of resultant path of self-realization. Let me concentrate on one passage in chapter 36. I highly recommend reading the book because it really contains the kind of like the corpus mysticum message, but in a kind of like coded form. Okay. in chapter 36, Captain Ahab on the deck, he basically says, okay, he explains the nature of reality. He basically says that, he says to the crew, he says, all visible objects are but as pasteboard masks, like virtual reality. So all visible objects are but as pasteboard masks, but there some unknown yet reasoning thing puts forth the moldings of its features from behind the unreasoning mask. So basically, Sanyata Maya, reality is illusory. It's like a pasteboard mask that's animated by some logic behind it. So like, like Elon Musk's Sam Altman's simulation theory. Okay, so that's, that's basic mysticism, isn't it? Kind of, but then he goes on to say then he says, okay, he says, if man will strike through the mask, for how can the prisoner reach outside but by thrusting through the wall? And then he says, to me, the white whale is that wall shoved near to me. Sometimes I think there's naught beyond. Now it's all about a whale hunt. He's trying to kill this whale that has basically disfigured him. He lives in a crucifixion with half a heart and half a lung. He is this dark, dingy character, tormented and obsessed by killing this whale. So it's quite a dark tale of theodicy, of his own hatred and his the kind of like injury that this dumb brute, this whale, Moby Dick, has inflicted on him. Now here's the interesting part. He says basically, okay, so he's saying that basically the whale is the wall, and by striking through, he can reach out through the mask, into this wider, somehow break through the illusion. Now here's the theodicy part. He says about the white whale, he says, I see in him an outrageous strength with an inscrutable malice sinnering it, like an evil, inscrutable evil. It is that inscrutable thing which I chiefly hate, and be the white whale agent or be the white whale principle, I will wreak that hate upon him. Now, in this kind of verse, I'd say, in chapter 36, he goes on to explain he knows the truth that he is God. Because he says, don't talk to me about blasphemy, man. I'd strike the son if it insulted me. For could the son do that, then could I do the other? For there's ever a sort of fair play therein. So he's saying he can strike the sun like Jimi Hendrix. I chop this mountain with my hand. He's putting himself in equivalence with the sun, for there's ever a sort of fair play herein. I can strike the sun. And then he goes on to say, jealousy presiding over all creations. He says, then not my master man. But hang on, isn't he one of the creations? Isn't Ahab a creation? No, he's saying not my master man. He's saying something different. He's saying, is even that fair play? Is there even an equivalence here? He's implying that he is God. Okay, and then he goes on to say, not my master man, basically, who's over me? Truth hath no confines. And he's saying he's God in such a way that reflects the corpus mysticum. There's actually a passage which says envy resides in the created, down below. but not to him that knows the truth. So it's almost like Herman Melville has read the Corpus Mater. Anyway, to cut a long story short, basically, Moby Dick is a book about evil. It's a book about this man's struggle between this evil inside himself and this white whale. But the story is about mystical transcendence. And what I'm trying to explain is basically this idea is universal. It's throughout all world religion. It's the idea of the jihad, which means struggle, which means a cosmic jihad against this kind of cosmic Satan, the kind of one who rebels, but there's an inner Satan. So jihad is this inner struggle. And one of Muhammad's quotes is that the most excellent jihad is the perfection of character. So jihad is really this pathway that leads towards this kind of like transcendent experience when you understand the core truth of Islam. And also in Zoroastrianism is this cosmic battle between good and evil. It's basically Ormazd versus Ahriman. Now, the Zoroastrian scriptures are very clear that what they're saying is basically this struggle is happening inside, on a cosmic plane, but it's also happening in the mind of an individual. And this idea of Satan, this idea of battle between good and evil in society and also within yourself. Now, when I say, when I'm talking about evil, I'm talking about, something, I don't want to downplay the nature of evil. So maybe just going to explain, just go into the nature of evil. Evil is very, very evil. It's very, very dark. So let me explain from a perspective of science, the nature of the dark side. Okay, so, the dark side really is our animal natures, and it's very, very dark. And what animals do to each other, you see stuff on TikTok. Okay, I've kind of lost all my street cred. I basically, my partner's younger brothers are kind of 30 years younger than me. They're really into TikTok, and they infected me with this thing called TikTok. And it's really addictive. Anyway, I typed in axolotls because I keep pet axolotls because I like, aquarium pets. And then TikTok led me to this, animal videos that got more and more ghastly. And you see ghastly things being done between animals. And you think, is that evil? Well, it's not, because it's animals eating each other, and etc., and hunting and etc. But if humans did that to one another, then it is evil. Now, there's something about the human nature, which is selfish genes. Okay, that is something that is basic science. The altruism, the science of altruism, selfish genes, is also the science of genocide. It is basically, it's animal, it's myself, my family, my clan, my race, in that order. Okay, so there's something about our makeup, which is, okay, one, it is selfish, it is tribal, it is slightly racist, and it's genocidal potentially, unless something overrides that. Now, what is that thing? And there's also sociopathic genes and schizotypal genes. The notion that sociopathic behavior is actually selected for through evolution. That sociopathic traits actually serve their ancestors to get ahead, to spread their genes. And that we suspect that, the kind of leaders of corporations and political leaders are sociopaths. And it might be completely true that they're actually good at getting into power. What I'm trying to say is basically in nature, there's something in our makeup, which is really, it's something biological. It is something, and it's basically something which is of our being. And when we talk about the cosmic battle between good and evil, it's a very, very difficult struggle. Okay, so we're not kind of like downplaying the kind of battle between good and evil by just reducing it to Star Wars and Frank Herbert and Joseph Campbell. We think it's something quite serious. But what we're saying is basically, this battle leads to good things. In our everyday life, we have these kind of sayings: no pain, no gain. Life's horrible experiences and bitter disappointments lead to better things. That through pain and suffering, we get to better places. Now, there's a suffering we choose. We go jogging to become fitter. We talk about examination hell, ghastly exam questions in order to progress in life. So there's that, which is quite trivial. The church where I was working in for 10 years, St. James's, had all these New Age talks every Monday. And when I was working the night shift, I heard them on the loudspeaker in the office. And basically, sometimes I'd go down to listen to the talks. So I've heard thousands of New Age talks working in that church. Okay, so literally, hundreds and hundreds, literally hundreds of New Age talks in those 10 years. And a recurring message in all these talks was, one, get out of your comfort zone, and that, evil and bad things happen to get you out of your comfort zone. And the punchline to so many of these talks, hundreds of these talks, the punchline was, bad things happen to you, evil things happen to you, and something good comes out of it. Okay, and then, end of talk, applause, buy my book. Okay, and it's true. Absolutely right, absolutely true. And we can go on. We can say things like great artists. You read their biographies. They suffered trauma. They suffered kind of like horrible stuff, manic depressive illness, schizophrenic illness, suicide. Basically something going on in their minds which is dark. We can go to kind of what people say. Great things through strife. Heraclitus and Nietzsche. You need chaos in your soul to produce a dancing star. And Carl Gustav Jung, a tree can't reach up to heaven unless its roots reach down into hell. And we see this in kind of famous people. We see trauma in their lives. I remember reading an article years ago. These famous people, but also entrepreneurs, a ridiculous number have lost their parents or were adopted. So Steve Jobs was adopted. Jeff Bezos was adopted. Elon Musk was bullied so badly, he was thrown down the stairs and beaten into a pulp. He went into a coma and was hospitalized. So you think you had it hard in school. I mean, Elon Musk had it far harder. And he realized these successful people, these artists, these entrepreneurs, these athletes, they really faced terrible things. And then back to Moby Dick. Now, the allegory here is that basically, Captain Ahab has been mauled. He's been basically half killed by this whale, and he wants to wreak revenge on this whale. And the end of the story is basically he gets the whale, he basically punches the hole through the wall, and he becomes united with the whale. So it's basically, the allegory is transcendence. So what I'm basically saying is basically, yes, there is this revision of the nature of good and evil. What it's saying is basically is revising the traditional notions of good and evil. The Catholic Church says what is good and evil, and it's saying that there is this cosmic battle being fought in the life of every individual. And if you're really doing the path of expansion, not the path of abnegation and retreating to a cave, or the path of just constantly taking psychedelic drugs, you're necessarily going to have to deal with inner demons, and you're necessarily going to have to deal with outer demons. But if somehow we can win this battle, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm saying the victory is for a very few people. It is the mythic quest hero, it is the saint, it is the real kind of like a person who really overcomes himself or herself that really attains this goal. But I think this really is the way of understanding the path of expansion, which is something that psychedelic drugs are doing in a very shortcut way, and that the path of contraction is doing in such a way where you're not having to really deal with those demons and the real world and your inner demons and the outer demons. So to conclude, okay, so what I'd say is basically the path of contraction of psychedelic drugs is not separate from the path of expansion, because I think the ultimate initiation is not to be told you are God. I think the ultimate initiation, and I think the meaning of the Eleusinian mysteries was to give people the direct experience of the eternal, and then they go off on their way. And the Eleusinian mysteries has to go hand in hand with what every Greek would have been taught in ancient Greece, which was the Iliad and the myth of Odysseus, that the island of the lotus eaters is the first port of call, that the purpose of Eleusius, Eleusinian mysteries, was the first port of call to give you that experience of the eternal, to then set off on the path of expansion into the real world. Now you can go back to Eleusius and have a reminder, that's fine. I'm not saying, people in the psychedelic scene think I'm a party pooper, because I say, I quote Alan Watts, if you get the message, hang up the phone. And I quote, I use the lotus eaters, once you want to continue the journey, you have to leave the island of the lotus eaters. I think people think people think I'm against psychedelic drugs. No, I'm all for Eleusius. I'm all for reviving the Institute of Eleusis. But I think that's the purpose of the Institute of Eleusis. And I think, just to conclude, I think it's not just about reviving a kind of building and the rituals and reinstating LSD or whatever, or Lotus or whatever, or, apomorphine, and then having the loud music. And then, kind of like, Sam Harris talks about, he would do his best to try and, make happen kind of retreats where you get 5 grams of magic mushrooms. Well, I think it's going to take more than 5 grams of magic mushrooms. But what I believe, it's not just about kind of reviving, these kind of rites, which already exist in the form of the international psychedelic trance scene, which I was heavily involved in my 20s, about 25 years ago. I think it's about really about reviving the entire worldview, the kind of the mysteries, the kind of like whole narratives which accompanied and were part of the Eleusinian mysteries. So I think the movement now involving people like even Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, even I mentioned earlier, but many people in the psychedelic scene and people trying to make drugs legal has to be part of a wider movement of a kind of shift in worldview that actually facilitates these experiences of being one with God, but also then provides the path of expansion for people to leave Eleusis, to leave under the lotus eaters, to then go into the real world and take it further. Okay, so anyway, I'll finish with a quote from the book Demian. Okay, the quote is this: "The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Who would be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The God's name is Abraxas." Okay, I'll leave it there. There's lots more material I skipped over, but I'll leave it there to basically leave time for, obviously, massive can of worms. You know, I mean, always people will be offended by this treatment of good and evil, and probably have kind of religious folks kind of flame mailing me in the next few days probably. But any questions? Any questions? By the way, this leads to another talk. So when I talk about this reviving the worldview, the next talk on the 14th of February is exactly about that. It's exactly the nature of this worldview. I mean, many people have tried to articulate it, a new operating system, a new worldview, like Jamie Wheel, like all these kind of thinkers, trying to bring about this paradigm shift, but no one can actually say what it is. Okay, no one can say what it is. All these kind of like, Charles Eisenstein, all these kind of like, well-known thinkers trying to, kind of like bring about this next state, kind of like, shift from the liminal to the new. But what I think is that you have to say exactly what that new worldview is. So very ambitious talk in 2 weeks' time. Do follow on Facebook to join. That will be exactly about what the worldview is that surrounds the recovery of the mysteries of Eleusis. Is there any questions?
Oh, Larry, can you see me? Let's see.
Yeah, Matt. My God, you're in the airport now.
Yeah. Let's see. Do you believe like the evil or the darkness is kind of like necessary in a way? Like it provides maybe some kind of resistance?
I think that evil is as fundamental as black and white. I think like yin and yang, Shiva, Shakti. I think what I've used this idea for years, actually, in some of my very early talks 20 years ago. I think nature of good and evil is as fundamental as this. You can't paint anything with white paint on a white canvas, and you can't paint anything with black paint on a black canvas. So in order to create the story of the universe and reality, and to create interesting storylines, you need good and evil. And the idea that basically these fallacies from the Roman Catholic Church of original sin and of being separate souls, and if you obey us, then basically you go to heaven or hell for eternal damnation, and heaven for eternity. These are fallacies. But when you understand there's only one soul, there's only one life, there's only one matter, the one God, who else can it be? Then that which is doing the evil, that which is doing all the good, suffering all the evil, suffering all the pain, experiencing all the pleasure, is the one soul. So you have a painting called The Universe from beginning to end, and it's got lots of detail, it's got lots of exquisite storylines, and those storylines are painted on a canvas that uses contrast, and it's white on black, black on white. If you had one color, there is, well, oblivion, there's nothing. I think good and evil is as fundamental as that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I just, and that question on a happy note. I think good always wins, because there's always a new creation, because it's the new cycle always begins. So something about good and evil, but because evil itself was created from the good, the new cycle was created, good and evil was created from the good. Evil destroys, evil is null. Do you see what I mean? The ultimate God, in a sense, the ultimate creator, is good, that generates, but evil is necessary to provide that contrast to really make the story more interesting. Sounds like
two questions based on that. That's really
yeah,
interesting.
great, Ollie.
So, do you think? Do you have some conception of how that idea integrates with fractal brain and fractal universe? The idea you presented in the initial talk, and is there something to do with? Could we say that, like, the idea of bouncing universal reality? Could we say that, like, the expansion is to do with good, and the contraction towards omega point is to do with so more and more evil, towards like the destruction of the universe and then the rebirth? Or
yeah. I mean, there is another talk which I'm preparing, which is okay. The other talk is a total merging. Did you notice the past two talks, the talk I gave in November and the talk I've given today, there's absolutely no mention of the fractal brain theory. Absolutely none. Okay, the reason why is because a couple of years ago, there's a kind of stalled book project with Daniel Pinchbeck, very psychedelic guy. Okay, what guy who reawakened the Western world's interest in ayahuasca, and basically the challenge was to distill essentially my message in 280 pages, basically. Then I realized there was no way I can communicate the fractal brain theory and communicate the religious stuff. So what I did, and what we worked out, was basically that the book would have no mention of the fractal brain theory. So, but then working on that book project, this is about 3 years ago, I developed the ideas to such an extent that they stood on their own ground. Okay, so I've given two talks, this talk and the talk in November. There's absolutely no reference to the fractal brain theory at all, but there is a total dovetailing of everything I said today and everything I said in November with the fractal brain theory. So what it means is basically the ideas I say stand on their own. They have their own kind of internal logic and their own internal, the cosmology and the metaphysics from November have their own power. And the kind of like what I've said tonight have their own kind of, consistency. It's not going to please everyone. I mean, obviously, conventionally religious people will be appalled. But I mean, but what I propose is basically these ideas in this talk in November can make their way into the world. But when these ideas are fused with this fractal brain theory, which is not just a brain theory, it kind of became synthesized as a kind of theory of life and intelligence. The symmetry between neuron, gene regulatory network, neuronal network, brain genome, evolution, learning, etc. And I think as that theory makes its way into the world, the idea is basically the synergy is such that basically in the future I can use that as a platform for explaining, these ideas from tonight and the ideas from November. So the answer is that there is a perfect merger of everything I said tonight with the fractal brain theory, but it's going to take about a couple of hours to explain it, Ollie. But yes. I mean, look. We've talked about the hypothalamus and the amygdala. The amygdala deals with pleasure and pain, and we talked about these emotion centers. Okay, we talked about the kind of like the battle between good and evil, and obviously our sense of disgust and terror and fear and desire and all these things to do with the battle of good and evil. Okay, there will be a correspondence in the hypothalamus, the amygdala, etc. Okay, that's what these psychedelic drugs are suppressing. Okay, I kind of propose. What the fractal brain theory then goes on to explain is there is a dynamic happening in terms of data structures, in terms of these trees growing, these diffusion limited aggregates, like we talked about in the other talk about artificial intelligence, and these kind of trees of behavior, and that the cosmic fractal, the cosmic battle is being fought out in our lives, in external reality, the things we represent. But ultimately, that cosmic battle is represented as, hypothalamus, amygdala, but it's also being fought out and represented as data structures in our brains. So there's absolutely a correspondence between these ideas of cosmic battle happening in a universe, happening in society, with literally a cosmic battle happening in our minds, like a Rubik cube we have to sort out in order to overcome our kind of fears overcome our desires in order to get that perfect score or perfect peace. So that's pending, Ollie. So that there is a you know, in the kind of microcosm of our lives, what is in terms of a normal life? Okay, you know, the last talk we explained that the normal life of, you know, starting a family, you know, having kids is a microcosm of the universe and a microcosm of the mythic quest hero. It means that in our lives, our normal lives, not wanting to be enlightened or the next enlightened Buddha or a Messiah or a kind of like mythic quest hero or whatever. In our normal lives, we want to start a family. We just want to meet a person of the opposite sex and get married and have kids and raise happy kids, basically. But even that is a cosmic battle. But even that is an act of creation. So I think that tiny little microcosm of a normal family life, do you get it? It's actually the cosmic battle won or lost.
I feel like I'm losing that one.
No, it's not easy. We've got screaming kids and you know, really pooey nappies, and you're changing a nappy, and like the kid puts a toy right in the mess, and it's like, ah.
Is that book you talk about with Pinchbeck? Is that the Quest book?
No. It's kind of you know, the really controversial idea about the chain, you know, the single chain of transmigration.
Yeah.
I think he really doesn't like the idea. I mean, it's so simple, and the idea is mathematics. The universe is a mathematical idea, kind of thing. So I think there's a kind of it might come out in a kind of like you know, kind of like attenuated form with those kind of metaphysical ideas in a separate book. I mean, I think you know, old Danny was mainly interested in the revolution stuff, you know, the revolutionary movement stuff. So there might be a kind of revolutionary movements analysis, but I mean, his background is history. So he's written some really good stuff on revolutionary movements, which extends the stuff I talked about and wrote in a kind of a book I attempted 20 years ago, which I gave him the notes to, and he kind of extended. So it might come out in the future. It might not. I have to talk to him at some point. But I had a communication blackout with everyone at the start of coronavirus, and I kind of lost contact with loads of people. So that is pending.
I might have to go in a sec. But
yeah.
I wonder if it's worth asking the question now. Then you just mentioned like about the universal soul, like the transmigrating soul.
Yeah.
And the idea of universe as mathematics and fractal, obviously. And I asked you the question on text, but maybe it's worth opening now for the audience about. Are you familiar with the concept of ontological mathematics in the way that the Pythagorean Illuminati talk about, and that conception? And if so, does that tie in with fractal? Because they talk about Fourier mathematics. I'm not sure how that would tie in with like a fractal idea.
Well, I think the idea is out there, and I think obviously, you know, Pythagoras was very influential. I think the more influential idea is really Plato's forms, and I think the idea is out there. I mean, Max Tegmark, I may use him because he's a mainstream MIT scientist. He's really kind of brought it into the mainstream. So I think there's many groups out there, you know, kind of really looking at the same thing. But it's really, I think, at the end of the day, is the group or the people who really tie it all together in a kind of single unified worldview, not just, you know, a kind of like I saw your email yesterday. I didn't reply, but I looked it up quickly. He seems to the author of the link you gave. It seems to tie up, you know, certain philosophers like Schopenhauer, like Pythagoras, like Plotinus, etc., etc. I think the real key is to you know, take these ideas of mathematical universe and actually unify it in a kind of I guess a broader framework. And I think one of the things which is missing from what I've read is basically the ideas of Riemann Lull. So the notion of a universal perfect language, the idea of a monad. So the question of what is the monad, that's a crucial question, going way back to Pythagoras and Anaximander, even before. So I think there are crucial questions left behind, which what I think the monad is, what I think the monad is basically, you know, a esteemed colleague wrote a very positive review for me on Amazon, and he's a very smart guy, but he thinks I've done something clever with category theory. Okay. The book came out 5 years ago, and I describe in layman's terms this thing called recursive self-modification. Okay.
Which book is this?
The Fractal Brain Theory book.
Oh, sorry, right, yeah.
Now, if there is a monad, and if the monad, according to John Dee, your Riemann Lulls, your Pythagoras's, your Anaximanders, this monad is basically the fundamental unit that is equivalent to God, essentially. But then the monad needs to generate and create all diversity and all the universe. So the idea of the universal perfect language is basically from a single point, just to generate all language, an entire universe. And it's the idea that the tree of the sciences, that the epistemology of the mind, the structures of the mind of knowledge, must reflect the structures of the universe. It's one and the same. Okay, so these are very ancient ideas which were really part of the Renaissance that have been forgotten. That people like Leibniz, this is what the background to what Cartesian geometry. What they were really interested was the universal perfect language.
Yeah.
Now the question of the monad, which I think I have an answer for, and it's a very I think elegant answer. It has to be recursive self-modification. Now, if you've got a monad, you have oneness. Then what can modify that thing? There's no outside force to modify that thing, is there? It has to modify itself. So necessarily the puzzle of recursive self-modification has to start at the monad. Do you get it? So I think at the heart of the fractal brain theory, the fractal genome theory, which is really a theory of life and intelligence, in the same way that E equals mc squared shows an equivalence between energy and matter. What the theory does now, which is the most recent developments, is that it shows a symmetry between life and intelligence. But then that distills down to this monad idea, and this monad idea, it is basically the answer to Noam Chomsky's universal grammar and what he calls the strong minimalist thesis. In fact, it's the most minimalist thesis there can possibly be. It's the monad. And it's also the answer to kind of Gregory Chaitin. I really admire this guy. He's really smart. He does a lot of work in discrete mathematics and Gödel's theorem. He proposed in his book Meta Mathematics, he proposed this idea of a dynamic formal axiomatic system that can generate all the other formal axiomatic systems. Okay, now look, Noam Chomsky talking about human language, and Gregory Chaitin talking about mathematical language. Now, let me tell you, obviously there's no sharp demarcation between human language and mathematical language, is there? For the simple reason that any mathematical language, you can say it using human language. It might be, very verbose, funny Greek symbol, parentheses, minus sign, but you can say it, okay? Now, when we go to the minimum, distilling human language to the minimum, universal grammar and the strongest possible minimalist thesis of language, monad of language, and we can't distill mathematics to the simplest possible formal axiomatic system that can generate all the other formal axiomatic systems, I say the two converge to a point. And that point of convergence is also the point of convergence of the fractal brain, life, intelligence, genome theory. It's the same point. And that is the nature of the universal perfect language, which Riemann Lull, Pythagoras, and Anaximander were talking about all along.
Yeah, I'd love to go on and on and on with you about this.
That takes some explaining. And there's this is where all the work has gone with the programming, basically. So people say, what are you doing a neural network? No, I'm doing a generative monad program that can generate complexity. It is like it's like Wolfram's cell automata, but it's a class 5 cell automata. It doesn't just generate the rules; it generates the field of action. But then the phase space of the rules generating is actually the generation of new rules, which feeds back on itself to generate more space and more rules of action. Did you get it? That's what's happening in your brain. That is the brain.
The Pythagoreans do have a conception of the monad, which is that basically you start with nothing, and nothing being equivalent with 0. And so you have a 0 point. But within 0, you have infinities, basically, because if you have +1 and -1, they equal 0. So within 0, you've got infinities in all directions, plus the imaginary numbers. And within those, it generates a sinusoidal wave. So they use Euler's formula, which describes the generation of a sinusoidal wave. And so if you have an infinity of these sinusoidal waves, the interaction of those is what is generating the complexity and the emergent the universe.
Right. I mean that's what I'm proposing is something far simpler, because what I'm doing is purely in discrete mathematics. And the thing about formal axiomatic systems, it is the most abstract level that mathematics can go. So all back to the great work, Russell North Whitehead and Bertrand Russell, great work, Principia Mathematica, reducing all mathematics into discrete mathematics, set theory, which then goes on to reduce into formal axiomatic systems, which is even simpler level, or formal systems. What I think is that basically the trick of recursive self-modification is it really can't be done using continuous mathematics. It does really happen at the level of discrete mathematics. And it kind of makes sense, because that really is the kind of most abstract, simplest level that mathematics can possibly occur in. So I mean, one of the things that's happening in the kind of machine learning world is what's called kind of like transformer networks. And they're called, they have attention mechanisms, and these attention mechanisms like use sine waves, and kind of like clashing sine waves and out of phase sine waves to represent space along words. Now that's horribly inelegant. When there's a far easier way of doing it using binary trees, which reflects the structure of language. So I think there is different approaches to this, and I think the kind of discrete mathematics approach is probably in my mind anyway, probably is going to deliver the goods better than sine waves. That's just my viewpoint. Okay. So it's really, at the end of the day, it's what's really going to push these ideas into the mainstream, and what's going to settle the dispute is the person who creates true artificial intelligence. And that's the aim of the late November talk, was relating these abstract ideas into some of the key issues, specific issues in the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
And when you say artificial intelligence, do you mean consciousness?
No. I mean finite intelligence. I mean practical things that work on your mobile phone to recognize your voice and stuff, and to drive cars. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, any other questions? I mean, very stimulating questions, Ollie. I mean, really, that really work my brain and go to really interesting places. But any other questions? Okay, that was another marathon session. Okay, it didn't go for 3 hours, which is great, because then it's like then it's really is gets a bit too long. So I mean, let us join me again in 2 weeks' time for the talk about the new worldview that kind of brings all these ideas together in a single kind of composite. The idea that all information exists in a kind of like in a kind of organic unity, but no one's been able to show how that organic unity exists. So we're going to dispense with all this kind of postmodern rubbish of everything being relative. There is an absolute around which all the seemingly relative facts coalesce, and that kind of like just unifies in the same way we kind of brought together world religion and indigenous religion, the kind of single composites with brain receptors. There's a unifying of all knowledge, and I mean all knowledge, all of it in a single composite organic whole. And that's what the talk in 2 weeks is going to be about. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me. Follow me on Patreon, subscribe, donate, help me proofread my new books, help me video edits, and just watch the videos, and just keep follow the message, and tell your friends, and just enjoy, yes, and come along on this little ride with me. Okay, thanks everyone for joining tonight, and I will stop recording now. Okay, I'll stop recording right now. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Okay, good night.